don't know what's going on. The timer's not working and the chat's not getting sent over either, so I don't know what's going on there. I need to take a look at that. The rest of my stream seems to be working okay. The thingies down here, down here, here. The subtitles seem to be working okay, but the chat isn't coming up on the side of the screen either. So I have to get that fixed. That wasn't working last week either, but I think my sound is. Let's see. Yeah, that's working. Voice mod is working, but the chat part isn't. Text part from Stream Elements is. I don't know. All right. Well, happy Saturday. I got a super late start today because my computer decided that it needed to reboot because of updates, and then also that it had to do a scan disk to check and make sure that there weren't any disk errors. So that took like a half an hour. That's like half of my time to prep. So that was annoying. But I still got stuff. We still have a bunch of stuff to go over, so that's good. Hope everyone is doing well on Saturday. My wife came back from her trip to Atlanta visiting a friend. Not happy about it, but she came back last night. Everything's good. Whole week with my daughter, though I'm usually upstairs and she goes to school. Goes to a friend of hers will come over, which I'm not happy about, but the thing. So we survived. That is great. I started reading the book Origins by Dan Brown. Now, I read his previous trilogy about it's about Robert Langdon, Da Vinci Code, Angels and Demons, and whatever the other one is, which I really enjoyed because at the time I was doing a lot of reading on. And this book here, I'm about maybe a quarter of the way through it. I think it's about religion again. It's Robert Langdon, same character, and I think it's about artificial intelligence though. So yeah, it's pretty good so far. I like the way he writes. It writes clean and very clean writing. I really enjoy that. So it's very easy to. I'm doing that, and I'm also, as I kind of mentioned last time, I'm writing giant post. I don't know what I'm gonna do with it yet. It's titled "Humanity's Journey from Abundance to Scarcity and Back Again." Currently, I have 2 Google Docs that I'm working within. And the first one is 77 pages long, and the other one is 22 pages long. About almost 100 pages of writing. About 30 to 40 pages of that is currently text I'm going to be using, like the first third. And there's another bunch of writing at the back end where I'm trying to take the research from my back research and put it in text, and then eventually I'll merge that into the front. So yeah, I don't know. Maybe this will be 50 or 60 pages of writing for the first third, and then I'll be able to eventually continue on to the second third of the writing, which consists of the Neolithic age up to now, basically. So the first part is the Paleolithic, talking about the Pleistocene and the weather and what happened just before we went into Revolution. And then I talk about the Neolithic Revolution up to now and why everything went to hell in a handbasket. And then the last third, we'll talk about my policies and a resource-based economy and how all of this matters. As far as fixing everything, so I'll talk about this whole thing from scarcity and abundance, why things were okay then, why things will affect revolution on up, and then we'll get into how my policies will fix that, and then how resource-based economy is that kind of next stage in evolution towards maximizing abundance and maximizing peace. So that's kind of what I'm planning with it. I don't know where, again, it's going to reside, but we'll see. We'll see. All right. So that's what's going on for me. What about you guys? What's happening with you? It was Saturday. Got COVID. Not a whole lot going on for most people. But yeah, not a lot going on with me either. Whoops. My computer's doing stuff in it. Blah. Uh, yeah. So that's all that's going on for me. All right, let's. Any questions, comments, and suggestions before we move on here? I know there's quite day like it was last week, but we can got stuff installing. I'm working over here. So we'll start over here. It's an article. This is from. Okay, this is from March of this year. So this is about. I don't know if they did anything about it or not, but that. Yeah, it went there. Oh my God, now why is Zoom popping up? Got all sorts of. Ah! My thing found a bunch of stuff that kind of freaking. All right, so daylight savings time. That's what this is about. Now I have a giant post on this. It was going to be the largest post I would have written at the time, but my capitalism resource-based economies post from 2020 beat that by almost probably twice the number of words, or something like that, by 50%. But we'll read this, and then hopefully maybe I'll go back to writing on that, and then I'll get that published. I need to get it published before our government does something about it, and then it becomes not so. All right, so let's go ahead and start reading this. Spring forward, fall back, will Senate vote to get rid of that? Now, I had heard, my father said that Trump had signed something to get rid of it. But I didn't really see anything in the news that talked about it. So it looks like, at least with this, that Trump hadn't signed it and was most likely talking about it, which is one good idea from him, but probably the only thing he said that was actually a good idea. All right, let's go into this. It's a 4-minute read. Again, this is March from 2022. Also, let me know about the music. Doesn't seem too loud on my side, but just let me know if it's loud on your side. All right. Scott Yates will be the first to admit that his signature campaign issue may not seem like a big deal. Okay, so someone's running for office on this. With the slogan, "Improving Your Life 1 Hour at a Time," the former journalist and tech startup founder launched his campaign to be the Democratic representative for Colorado's 3rd Congressional District earlier this year with a promise to lock the clock and end America's biannual time change. It may not seem like much, says Mr. Yates, who also hopes to address student debt and climate change in Congress, but ending the change would be a step toward repairing America's faith in daylight saving time isn't the most important in the world, but it is an example of something that is broken and that we can fix. Let's do that first, and then we can fix what comes next. Okay, so yeah, all the research I'm finding, or that I've spent a long time reading this, shows ending daylight savings time is a thing. It's actually killing people. It's something in there that I dub as death by daylight savings time, right? Yeah, I know. It's a thing. People are basically being killed by the change. Some people's bodies don't adjust to it very well, especially if people are older in the hospital. Especially people with certain comorbidities for this end up dying significantly earlier, and there's a lot more accidents. It costs money. It's just, there's a huge impact, and there's basically no, or at least a negligible gain to daylight savings time. This was a monumental week for daylight saving times activists like Mr. Yates. On Tuesday, the U.S. Senate passed the Sunshine Protection Act, which would make daylight saving time permanent. Oh, I wasn't aware of this. Let's take a look at this. So this is in March. We'll see if they actually signed it. At any point, I'll finish my post at some point in the future, even though it's really late. just to get it out there. Daylight savings begin on the second Sunday in March, when almost all Americans move their clocks 1 hour ahead, often referred to as spring forward, and ends the first Sunday of November, when Americans revert to standard time known as fall back. Under the Sun Time Protection Act, Americans would fall back to the standard time in November, bring forward again in March 23, and then stay forward forever. Which, that's in my post on this, that's kind of what I will probably recommend. Is, stay an hour ahead. It doesn't matter to me, honestly. An hour behind or ahead is just whichever you want. Just pick one and stick with it. Sponsored by Republican Senator Marco Rubio. Ugh, dirty already. Florida, the bill passed by unanimous consent, meaning that no senator objected. The Sunshine Protection Act still needs to pass the House and be signed by President Joe Biden before it can be law. But at a time when gridlock so often reigns in Washington, national relations feel dire, proponents say this week's passage added a little light to their day. No pun intended. We had no idea it was going to be on the docket. It came out of nowhere, said Kevin Rosnick, who works in healthcare system in Detroit. He started a pro-daylight saving time Facebook group 3 years ago, and it has grown to several hundred members, a politically diverse mix from across the country. Someone once described it as a little big thing, and I think that's it, said Rosnick. By and large, the country just hates the time change, whether it be for daylight saving or standard time. They just can't stand moving the clock, and I think that's what brought a lot of us together. Pros and cons of daylight saving. Associated Press NORC Center for Public Affairs research poll from October found that only 1/4 of respondents preferred the switch back and forth, daylight saving and time. 3/4 of respondents would like the United States to stick one time. 3/4, so that's 75%, right? A level of agreement not found on other prevalent issues asked about in the survey. But the majority was split between preferring daylight saving time, which gives more sunlight in the evening, and standard time, which gives more sunlight in the morning, with about 10% preferring standard time. Many northerners who struggle with high altitude induced early sunsets are in the pro daylight saving group. We have sunset in Rhode Island at 4:15, said Democratic Senator Sheldon Whitehouse earlier this week, adding that this leaves most workers commuting home in the dark. Pro daylight saving advocates also point to studies that show robbery rates decrease when there's more light in the day. Yeah, there's studies on this sort of thing, but it's really moderate for any of this. It's almost negligible. Those on the other side of the debate, such as American Academy of Sleep Medicine, say lighter mornings and darker evenings are more in line with the body's natural rhythm, encouraging more productive days and better nights of sleep. This timing also makes students' commutes to school safer, argues the group's Save Standard Time, and it improves productivity for people whose workday is tied to sunrise for agricultural reasons. Well, okay, so for this here, they're going to get up regardless of what the clock says. They get up with the sun. What the time is irrelevant. What the clock says is irrelevant. All they care about is sunrise or sunset. That's how they go by. Standard time proponents argue that daylight saving is promoted by lobbyists in the tourism, golf, and retail industry, found a correlation between brighter evenings and consumer spending. Right, that thing. But one great aspect of the Sunshine Protection Act, says Mr. Gates, is that it allows states to make their own decisions. Oh my God, between daylight savings versus standard time. Fuck, they did this in the past, and it was a giant ass morass of different time zones all across the fucking country. Horrific. States could choose to be on standard time year-round, as Arizona and Hawaii do already, as long as they do so before November 23rd, when the Sunshine Protection Act would go into effect. This would allow states to use the next year and a half to study their sunrise and sunsets and decide what works best for them. How 10 time changes got started. Okay. So I start with, in my policies, in my article on this, I start with how it started. So it's pretty interesting. In 1918, President Woodrow Wilson followed the lead of European allies and adopted daylight saving time as an effort to conserve energy with additional daylight hours during World War I. The measure was dropped when the war ended and didn't resurface until World War II, when daylight saving time, referred to as wartime, was again mandated nationally by President Franklin Roosevelt. That too was repealed after the war, and localities could choose whether to observe the time change until it was nationalized with the 1960 Time Act. Okay, While the change was initiated to save energy, there's no consensus about whether it achieved that goal. Some studies say the small savings from daylight savings time add up to a lot. Some say switching actually increases energy demand. And others show no effect on energy. Right. So there's very little. If there is any savings, it's marginal at best. One thing that does seem clear is that people don't like changing between the two times. 2015, more than 450 bills and resolutions have been introduced in the state, says Jim Reed, who covers the topic for National Conference of State Legislatures. And in the past 4 years, 18 states have enacted legislation or resolutions that would switch them to daylight savings time full time, pending a federal law change. It's really the act of time changing that's the problem, says Mr. Now that the U.S. Senate has acted, I think the debate is going to be more robust to benefit one way or another on standard versus daylight. Okay. There you go. So yeah, this is in March of this year, and let's see if this was actually signed and see if this is actually going to go. Okay, it hasn't. So it's still in the past them, but it hasn't moved forward at all. I don't know where this is going at all. Well, that's too bad. Yeah, I would like to see this get passed so we can move on. But this is a part of my policies. You need to pick one and stick with it and move on because it is killing people. All right, any questions, comments, or suggestions before we move on? Also, let me know if that's the music is loud. All right, next article. Scholars ask Congress to scrap winner-take-all political system. Okay, so yeah, this is part of my political policies as well. Winner takes all, first past the post, majority wins. Voting is pretty much what creates the two-party system. I write about that in my, God, it's been so long since I've talked about this one. The systemic suppression inherent in America's two-party system. I talk about that in there. That's kind of the first thing I target, that we have the two-party system because we are a winner-takes-all system. More than 200 political scientists wrote an open letter to lawmakers proposing sweeping changes to federal elections. The overhaul would be a heavy lift. Yeah, and so, yeah, we need to shift to, as they're saying here, they don't say proportional representation. So that's what we do need to switch to. Proportional representation, and along with ranked choice voting. Those two things kind of go hand in hand for ranked choice voting is what kind of enables proportional representation. All right, this is from September 19th, last month. There's one thing we know about America's creaking democracy. This. Whenever it seems fundamentally broken, people get together to try and fix it. That's happening now. We're living through one of the United States' periodic bursts of reformist energy, with various groups pushing to alter the structure of our elections, even as, or rather because, millions of voters on both sides of our partisan divide question the integrity of the system, which we have none. The latest entry is a roster of more than 200 American political scientists who have put forward a sweeping proposal to change the way the United States has conducted its federal elections for nearly 200 years. In a sharply written open letter to Congress published on Monday and shared in advance with the New York Times, the scholars tell lawmakers it's clear that our winner-take-all system, where each House U.S. district is represented by a single person, is fundamentally broken. They call on Congress to adopt inclusive multi-member districts with competitive and responsive proportional representation. Yep, that sounds perfect. Although I don't talk about this in my policies, although I probably should. And a part of when some people do talk about this level of of reform, they do talk about shifting also to a unicameral legislative body instead of the House and Senate. Two different parts making up the entirety of Congress. They recommend talk about getting rid of both and just having one congressional legislative body. In this case, we would have, much like they're talking about here, they would have every district represented by more than one people, and then use proportional for your portion the representatives. And I think I might eventually change my policies. We'll see. List of signatories includes 9 of the 18 living U.S.-based winners of the Johan Skytte Prize, a prestigious Swedish award that has become kind of unofficial Nobel for political science. Robert Axelrod, Francis Yama, Peter J. Katzenstein, Robert Keohane, David D. Leighton, Margaret Levi, Aaron Leipard, Philip C. Schmitter, and Rain Tagapera. Don't know any of those names. Our arcane single-member districting process divides, polarizes, and isolates us from each other. The professor's right. Okay, it has effectively extinguished competitive elections for Americans and produced a deeply divided political system that is incapable of responding to challenges with necessary legitimacy. Okay. What the writers want and need from Congress. In simple terms, what these professors are proposing is a shift from districts where voters in each of the 2 major parties first choose the representatives through partisan primaries, then select a single winner during the general election. Okay, yep. The system where voters choose multiple members to represent the same area with votes allocated proportional to population. Oh, okay, all right. So instead of having partisan primaries, they have basically open primaries where everyone can run. You have multiple Democrats, but then multiple Republicans, multiple Democrats, multiple everyone, and then those who win the highest number of votes gets slotted into the winning seats. So if there's 10 seats that are going to be that are up for election, then the top 10 through ranked choice voting would be the ones who would get seats. Portion, number of votes, and that's that. So pass this law, they would have to need to pass a law basically telling Democrats and Republicans how that they need to do their primaries. I don't know how well that's going to work. But yes, this sounds like a good idea. The system let's see. Yeah. That general approach is already used in Arizona, although importantly the districts are still winner take all, but it's widespread in other countries, and advocates argue that it dilutes the power of extreme parties. In the Czech Republic, for instance, changes to the election system resulted in a moderate coalition government last year in spite of fears that far-right candidates were gaining momentum. The United States, changing the federal election system nationwide would require an act of Congress. Yep, politically tricky to pull off, to put it mildly. Article 1, Section 4 of the Constitution grants the authority to set the time, place, and manner of holding elections for senators and representatives, but also gives Congress the power at any time by law to make or alter such regulations. Okay, yeah. Good to know. That ambiguity means there's ample room for dispute about whether Congress or the states are the appropriate decision maker. Republicans, at least recently, have tended to argue that states ought to have the primary say in how federal candidates are elected, while Democrats are more often in favor of national level change. Oh, right, because Republicans want winner take all so that they can contain control and keep the having a vote. And then Democrats will want much more broader change. Gives more vote to the are more, not that Democrat left, but you know what I mean. Much depends on whose ox is being gored. Republicans have long thought they benefited from partisan gerrymandering, especially in states like Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, yep, where the GOP is overrepresented in state legislatures relative to the statewide votes, yep. Letter writers argue that the change would render gerrymandering obsolete and help ensure that a political party's share of votes in an election actually determines how many seats in the House. Good thing. They also say it would dilute the impact of Supreme Court's recent moves to weaken Voting Rights Act because it would empower communities of color, which often find themselves on the losing end of elections unless they make up an absolute majority of a district. Okay, yep. The failure of independent commissions. One factor powering the shift in favor of multi-member districts is the failure of independent redistricting commissions to bring about fundamental change. After redistricting in 2010, when Republicans used their newfound legislative majorities in many states to redraw the maps for state legislatures and House seats aggressively, Democrats vowed to even more next time. Right, and this is why it needs to be independent instead of partisan. Several states, especially Arizona, Michigan, and New York, voters' attempts to fix what they saw as excessive gerrymandering ended in widespread disappointment, partisan bickering over the makeup of the commissions, the authority of elected leaders to override them. According to the Cook Political Report, only 33 House districts are toss-ups, meaning that they are competitive in general elections. Further, 23 districts are classified as leaning toward Democrat or Republicans, meaning that only in wave election are they likely to change hands. State legislatures, the numbers are even starker. Pennsylvania, for instance, one party or another often doesn't even bother fielding a candidate. Whoa. In 2020, before the latest remapping process, only 25 of 218 districts of the state house were decided by under 10 percentage points, according to time analysis. European wine in an American bottle. Basic framework for change has been kicked around for years, primarily but not exclusively left. Some in Congress have taken up the cause, including Representative Donald S. Byer Jr. of Virginia, the Democrat who built his fortune through auto dealerships in the suburbs of Washington. Byer's a bill, the Fair Representation Act, that proposes multi-member districts with proportional representation. Great. Twist is that the legislators would be selected through ranked choice. System used most recently to elect Representative Mary Peltola of Alaska in a election. Right, and that's pretty much the way you have to do it. Byer's bill has won praise from advocacy groups, but it has attracted only 8 co-sponsors, none of them Republicans, of course, because Republicans are the ones who are going to really lose out on this. Because if the people's voice are heard, a lot of Republicans are just, they're not going to get voted, and that's a good thing. Why they will never ever sponsor them en masse. It's not likely to move forward during this Congress, his deputy chief of staff said in email, because of course the Democrats, especially Mama Bear, Nancy Pelosi, want a strong Republican Party, and they can't have that if you don't have widespread electoral corruption and all that sort of stuff. But Ben Raderstorff, a policy advocate at Protect Democracy, a nonprofit group, said the broader concept of fundamental changes to the electoral system was gaining momentum. For instance, the editorial board of the Boston Globe has endorsed it, as has Jesse Wegman, who wrote an opinion essay in the Times on the subject. The Times opinion section is separate from the newsroom. Dam is starting to break, Raderstorff said, pointing to widespread disappointment of reformers with results of district. He also noted what he called the Trump effect, the idea that the former president's nonstop fanning of conspiracy theories and his increase of fringe candidates, often in highly gerrymandered Republican districts, was shining a harsh light on the weakness of America's all-election system. So, yeah, multi-member districts, proportional representation, and ranked choice voting. Those are the 3 things that we really need in a lot of these places. Now, the other part of this is we do need to, in some way, shift to a more digital form of voting so that it's easier to vote, so that we have a trail. We can use blockchain as a part of that paper trail to keep track of who's voting and so on and so forth. Several organizations out there that have this technology out there where blockchain track the votes, and that's really what we need to do. And there's ways that these softwares can also send you a receipt so that you have a receipt, a paper trail to track when you change your ballot. All right, the rest of the story. As my colleague David Leonhardt writes in a deep look at what he calls the twin threats to American democracy, however, partisan gerrymandering is only part of the story. Yep, so-called geographic sorting of conservatives and liberals into rural and urban enclaves probably accounts for a greater portion of how Republicans and Democrats have become polarized over the last half century. Overall, Leonhardt notes gerrymandering is not a factor in the outcomes of non-competitive districts like New York's 14th overwhelmingly Democratic area of the Bronx that Representative Alexandria has won by nearly 45 points in 2020. Ocasio-Cortez's safe seat allows her to take wildly popular positions on the left, raise grassroots money from all over the country, and then redeploy those funds to bolster challengers, lawmakers she deems insufficiently progressive. Although a lot of that money, from what I've read, is going to the Democratic Party, and she isn't really sending that money towards more progressive candidates, and is sending that money towards are supported by the Democratic Party. I'm going to go ahead and lower my desk down. In just a moment. What just happened? Sorry. One moment. Thing behind the curtain. All right. That looks okay. All right. The result is a weakening of the party establishment, a phenomenon that is even more pronounced on the right. On the Republican side, the hollowing out of the official party organs helped give us the Trump presidency. Far-right House members like Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, Georgia, and Lauren Boebert of Colorado. Ugh. Many GOP members of Congress now live in fear of facing a primary challenge, worries that have deepened as Trump has thrown his weight around within the party. Paper Trump's track record so far this cycle is mixed. According to my colleague Alice McFadden, who keeps a spreadsheet of his endorsements, the former president's preferred candidates won all but a handful of House primaries season. But often Trump's influence on Republican politics is more subtle. Much like a tractor beam on the Death Star, it creates a gravitational pull that leads most politicians on the right to orient their position in his direction. Ugh. Some of these guys need to get a set of balls. Eli Zupnik, a co-founder of Fix Our House, an advocacy project that favors proportional representation, said that moving away from a winner-takes-all system would help politically homeless politicians like Representative Wyoming, who lost the Republican primary this summer to compete and win across the country. Right now, we have a system where more than 90% of district elect members in low turnout primaries that reflect only the priorities of each party's respective bases. Zupnik said, but the proposed changes, he said, would force parties to compete across the country for every voter, and each district would elect representatives that truly reflect the values and priorities of that district. Okay, yeah, that's good. That's good stuff. Definitely need all of that. Any questions? I'll go ahead and share my electoral policies so you can look at those if you want. There's a lot there. There's just a ridiculous amount of things that we need to fix to have anything even borderline representing a democracy, as we most hardly don't have that here. All right. Questions, comments, or suggestions on electoral reform? Before we move on, got some good news possibly here. And let me know if that music is too loud as well. Okay for me, assuming it's, but it might still be too loud as compared. What? I'm gonna unlock this. Fine. There. Okay. All right. So we'll do this next. This is Euronews.green, major milestone for Greek energy as renewables power 100% of electricity. Now we've had what was it, Germany? Germany or Finland at one point over the last few years has had majority of its power from renewables at one point. But let's see what they have to say. Like here, this is my problem with this here, right? I mean, sure, this is out here where not a whole lot can grow, but you know, they could take solar panels need to be facing to be like out above something, and all that space underneath is going wasted. They need to put something underneath those solar panels so we can make much better use of this land. Like typically I'll talk about like underneath this we can stack vertical axis wind turbines. Maybe that'll work. And below that you can put a vertical farm of several stories of vertical farms. Be awesome too. So you know, this just having solar panels here is kind of a waste. We take better advantage of land because land is going away. All right, this is from 11/10, November 10th. So this is day, month, year. Now, I wish when they would do this, they would put whether or not this is. So this is October 11th, which is a few days ago. So renewable energy met all of Greece's electricity needs for the first time ever last week. The country's independent power transmission IPT. Okay, so and another thing about Greece, right? Greece has their land is at a premium. They don't have a whole lot of land because they're a small island, right? So again, taking a moment when you're building something like this to take better advantage of the land, better use of it, very yeah. Also, places like Greece, they could be using tidal, wave, ocean stream energy too. Something just made it. Something might off. I don't know why. Yeah. That was strange. Okay. So yeah, so Greece is an island, so they should be using ocean and tidal and wave and that sort of thing. A lot of their because they're an island, they may also have access to. Well, that would be the other way to go, but ocean and wave would be one of the primary ways that they're trading on power. And then this sort of a headline would be kind of the relying on this is requires you to have batteries. Problematic. Requires a lot of rare earth minerals, assuming you use the lithium ion. Like in my Discord, I shared a post talking about CO2 batteries, which seems pretty good. So there's other ways, that's just basically off-the-shelf parts, and that works pretty well. All right, let's read this. So renewable energy met all of Greece's electricity needs for the first time ever last week, the country's independent power transmission operator IPTO announced. Oh, for at least 5 hours on Friday, renewables accounted for 100% of Greece's power generation, reaching a record high of 3,106 megawatts. So 3.1 gigawatts, right? Solar, wind, and hydro represented 46% of the nation's power mix in the 8 months to August this year, up from 42% period in 2021, according to Greece-based environmental think tank, the Green Tank. Green Tank called it a record of optimism for the country's transition to energy, weaning off fossil fuels and ensuring our energy efficiency. Yeah, it's a good start, but concentrating and are they using? I want to see what their mix really is of. They're using. Okay, so we'll just keep reading. We'll get to that. Europe's countries like Greece are rapidly accelerating away from fossil fuels and towards cheap renewable electricity. The milestone reached by Greece proves that renewables dominate electricity grid is within sight. Elizabeth Cremona, an analyst at energy think tank Ember, told Green. This also clearly demonstrates that the electricity system can be powered by renewables without compromising reliability, but there remains more to do to ensure that renewable fossil fuels in Greece's power sector across the whole year. What's the big picture for Greece's energy transition? It's a significant milestone in the history of the country's electricity system. It follows the bright news that renewables fully met the rise in global electricity demand for the first half of 2020. Okay, that's pretty good. Renewables fully met the rise in global electricity demand for the first half of 2020. Okay, good. But Greece's transition to clean energy hasn't been entirely straightforward. Of course not. Like other European countries, Greece has cut its reliance on Russian gas following the war in Ukraine by increasing liquefied natural gas imports to meet its needs. It has also boosted coal mining, pushing back its decarbonization plan. Again, you fucker faces, shifting to ocean tidal is what you need to power. Based on IPTO electricity from renewables, it hit an all-time record covering 100% of electricity demand for 5 hours on October 7, 2022. Okay, here's the rate, Greek, which we read. Using IPTO data, the Green Tank finds that renewables, including large hydro sources, surpass all other energy sources, fossil gas, in second place as it decreased slightly for the first time since Greece aims more than double its green energy capacity to account for at least 70% of its energy mix by 2030. That's good. To help hit that target, the government is seeking to attract around 30 billion European funds and private investments to upgrade its electricity grid. Okay. It plans to have 25 gigawatt of installed renewable energy capacity from about 10 gigawatt now, but analysts say that Athens might reach that target sooner. IPTO has been investing in expanding the country's power grid to power capacity and facilitate the penetration of solar, wind, and hydro. All right. So, I mean, that's good news, but the mix they're using is problematic. Sure, this stuff is cheaper, but it can't provide base load power and you need batteries. They can. Ocean, tidal, and wave. Our satellites would be a way, and geothermal, which would be what they are concentrating for baseload power, and then this would be just a way to supplement the baseload power provided by those. Ugh. All right, so I'll share with you my policies to talk about this a lot within my policies. You can take a look at that. Any questions, comments, or suggestions before we move on? All right, one moment. I'm gonna get my sleepers on so my footsies don't get cold. Ugh. All right, from Wired, this is from October 4th, about 2 weeks ago. Is green capitalism total BS? Yes, from here on my channel, you know it is. It is complete BS. But yeah, let's see what they have to say. In The Value of a Whale, author Adrian Buller argues forcefully against market-based solutions to the climate crisis. She thinks we can do better. Yeah, we most definitely can, and my policies pretty much say what we need to do in order to handle it better. And it's you pretty much, it can only be done through the federal government. Not save humanity from global extinction without large-scale spending in the like I say here, right? That if your climate change bill isn't 10 trillion plus per year, you're pretty much voting for human extinction. That's just this. Full stop. And we have that article, which is also linked to my policies, that what is it, $62 trillion is what it costs globally to switch to sustainable energy over 10 years. Is it 60 trillion over 10 years? I can't remember what it was, but you make that money back in 6 years just on the savings alone. I mean, it's an amazing article. So yeah, it's trillions of dollars, or you're wasting everyone's. All right, how much is a whale worth? It's like a self-evidently ridiculous question, borderline obscene. Whales are majestic creatures whose worth transcends the human impulse to quantify, obviously. Yet it is one which has been seriously considered by economists in an effort to convince governments and corporations to value wildlife. In her new book, The Value of a Whale, on the illusions of green capitalism, Adrian Buller dissects the asinine logic of green capitalist thinking, from putting a dollar value on quotations to carbon offsets to financial products like sustainability bonds. The director of research for the progressive think tank Commonwealth, Buller sees market-based corporate green initiatives as distracting at best and at worst actively destructive. The Value of a Whale takes a bracing look at how corporate interests are using the superficial trappings of climate activism to reinforce their own power. Yep, one might imagine it is not the most uplifting read in the world, but it's a galvanizing, tough book, one that asks us not to accept a simulacrum of improvement thing. Wired talked with Buller about whale pricing, evil economists, and reasons to find hope for. Yeah, and when we're talking about this is also pointing at Elon Musk as one of the major chiefs of the green capitalism issue, right? As we've been fairly critical of Musk here. Tesla, it's not, if Elon Musk was really in this to, save humanity from extinction, he wouldn't be promoting cars. He would be working on all electric mass transportation. That's what we need. That is what we need to get all these fucking cars off the roads. And he wouldn't be looking so much at moving to Mars. He'd be working on sustainable energy, geothermal. He'd be using his engineering knowledge and his resources to work on geothermal, high-altitude wind turbines, power satellites, and tidal and wave, because that's what we need. Mass transportation and that's what we need. But he works on individual cars, because that's where the money is. All right, Adrian Buller. The way I define it in the book is intentionally a working definition. It addresses a phenomenon we're seeing in the US and in the UK, where the corporate sector and financial firms have realized overt climate denialism and obstruction is not a viable strategy, so they're slowly transitioning toward trying to shape and control climate policy. There are two core tenets of green capitalism I identify. First is that it's an attempt to resolve the climate crisis in a way that minimizes disruption to our existing ways of organizing the economy to existing distributions of wealth and power. Second tenet is pursuing decarbonization in a way that makes sure that there are still opportunities for profit making and rent extraction that decarbonize the future. In contrast to, for instance, away from private car ownership to mass transit as a climate solution. Green capitalist framework is more about making sure we can electric vehicles when we're moving away from fossil fuel cars so that private companies are profiting. Right, that's exactly right. And that's what I just said. Okay, now my camera doesn't look right. Hold on a second. Yeah, I'm really kind of yellow here. Hold on. Ugh. That's a little bit. All right, we'll stay. All right, so yeah, that's exactly what I was saying, right? And what we need is mass transportation and not cars. What we need is for them to be working on energy and not cars. What motivated you to critique green capitalism? I'd been working in the climate and finance civil society space for several years, and I started out at a totally non-political watchdog company that helps financial firms understand how they should align their portfolios with the goals of the Paris Agreement. Okay, that's good. That's cool. I ultimately came out of that experience feeling very cynical about whether that type of approach will actually deliver kind of material change. Fair. But I found the experience really interesting in terms of crawling inside the heads of people working in finance and getting to grapple with how they understand the problem. That's what this book tries to do. This sounds like a really interesting book to read that I should probably read myself. But yeah, it's pretty hard for individual finance to finance our way out of out of extinction because honestly, there's no profit. There's no. Start freaking out. It's hard to finance our way out of extinction if we have to deal with profit. That's private finance isn't going to save us from extinction. It requires high level federal level expenditures of billions of dollars. Just private finance isn't. You titled the book after an especially striking example of how absurd green capitalism can be. The International Monetary Fund, them, decided to place a price on whales about 1 trillion for the whole species, or about 2 million per individual whale. He arrived at this figure by calculating how much carbon whales sequestered and saw it as advocating for whale conservation as a way to fight climate change. What made you choose this particular example to open the book? For me, it captures everything about green capitalism that is both seductive in an intuitive sense and also deeply problematic in practical. On one hand, there's the intuitive appeal to the idea that the reason nature is because we don't value it within our economic systems. Yep. So we need to find a way to do that. It's the idea that if we can just make governments or the corporate sector appreciate the role that elements of, like a whale, have in things they care about, money, stable economy, etc., then that can be a solution. Trying to make a whale compliant with market-based logic is how most governments are trying to approach the crisis, and I think that it captures the absurd and brutal way that economics engage. Plus, I just love whales. So yeah, in my policies, I approach this definitely differently. I say we need to change the way our businesses and our parties and everything works. That the first thing that businesses should be judged by is on human rights, basically education, healthcare, income inequality, basic minimum wage, and that sort of thing. And the second thing they should be judged on is how they deal with the environment. If they're polluting, taxes go up. If they're regenerative, taxes go down, right? So taxation, fines, and fees directly report how well they do humanity in the natural world. And then the tertiary way that businesses could be looked at, and definitely a lesser important, is profit. All right. Speaking of other absurd value assignments, later in the book you discuss a measurement called the value of a statistical life, VSL, which I did not know existed. It was developed during the Cold War to compare costs of military operations. Right, that VSL ranges from 8 to 11 million per life nowadays. Lives of those lower income nations or lower income regions than a country are assigned lower VSL. Oh, wow. Very starkly drives home how morally perverted these calculations are. there e- are there even ways for the field of economics to address climate change that aren't blatantly ghoulish? Yes, I think so. There are a lot of people working in the heterodox economic space, trying to overcome a barrier that the economics discipline has created for itself artificially. Barrier is the idea that economics is somehow not a social science, that it is not inherently political. Some economists like to pretend that it's closer to natural science, which is obviously not the case. I think if we can reclaim the fundamental social and political reality of the economic space, that we can. Yeah, no, that's economics is a self-referential cult based off false premises. It's really hard to rescue something like that from itself, and especially when monetary systems, profit are the primary driver for the entire problem that we have. We cannot evolve. Economics itself cannot help us to evolve beyond the problem it helped to create, right? So that's a whole lot of wishful thinking there. I think that we'll see some climate reparations enacted in our lifetime. So I do talk about this in my policies. Reparations are a large part of how we need to deal with this, specifically with the South. The United States itself needs to give trillions to the global South. Great Britain needs to give trillions to the global South. The U.S. and Great Britain are the two original imperialists, and then Europe as well needs to give trillions to the global South, help them transition to sustainable energy, to shift their economies, shift their entire countries to first world status. You know, healthcare, universal education, sanitation, and all that sort of stuff. Without that, really, you're basically dooming global South to extinction. It's a very capitalist thing, because capitalism is racist, imperialist, and colonialist. All right, the optimist in me wants to say yes. I think that it is not just necessary according to my own principles around justice, but also purely pragmatically necessary as well. Even if you didn't care about the justice aspect, the extreme levels of inequality in wealth, income that we see in the global economy, both within countries, destructive histories upon which those inequalities are based, reparations still have to be enacted if we are going to deliver an economy that things that I think most, if not all people, would agree should happen. One is maintaining a habitable planet. The other is, with all phenomenal wealth that we have in the world, to deliver a good standard of life planet. So, okay, those are fair. Not everyone is going to agree with this because nationalism and racism and colonialism, right? Fuck everyone else as long as my country's fine, right? That inherent tribalism that is a part of capitalism. But those of us on the left that care about humanity and whether or not we go extinct, yeah, the rest of us would definitely think that way. Yeah, we can, that's kind of one of the bases of a resource-based economy. We can provide an amazing quality of life for everyone on the planet and still be sustainable, if not regenerative, in almost pretty much every single aspect. I mean, like as I say this many times over doing here over the years, that the example of creating arcologies or even something even remotely close to that, the Science and Futurism Isaac Arthur episode on arcologies basically did some math and said we could have an arcology or something similar, one every mile along the coast of the country, United States. And we could basically have the entire population living there while making the entire interior of the country wild. Rewild it. So, yeah, we could green the shit out of this planet fairly quickly if we shifted to something like that. Ecology's everywhere. I think if you believe in those principles, then there's no getting around the fact that reparations-based framework is necessary. Yeah, I agree, 100%. There's really interesting campaigning work happening around the climate finance targets that are part of United Nations climate change, which not even borderline close. And the amount of money that they're talking about, that is so pathetic that it's not going to do anything might not even save lives because of the amount of money required to lift up these countries in the global south. I mean, horrific how much the global north has stolen, looted, and raped from, which is 100 billion per year in climate finance to poor countries. Okay, so that right there, yeah. So this is fucking. I bitched about this in my post on. Oh, this up actually. Top 26. Let's read this. I'm gonna read this here. Come on. Yeah, reparations and climate justice, right? So I pulled this. Did I pull this? No, this is written. Yeah, okay. So no talk about climate change or colonialism can be had unless we talk about reparation by the colonists to the colonized. You're the abject theft of the wealth from the global south by the global north, whose theft pays dividends as impoverishment always does. The compound is poverty. Global north will need to send trillions of dollars a year and not an anemic 100 billion to the global south to pay for the direct loss of wealth as well as directly returning businesses as possible, plus pay for compound interest on the stolen wealth. That will be trillions a year for the U.S. Right, that should be a good start. Global South will never be able to mitigate the worst effects of climate change without reparations from the North, and the global North must pay reparations in order to begin to correct the egregious harms it has inflicted upon the global South. No healing or even a pursuit of humanity as a globalized civilization be had until done. Here's some links to it. Reparations. I'll see if I can get a reparation. I will copy that. Get you. Yep. Yeah, so 100 billion. That won't do it. Obviously, that hasn't been delivered. A lot of it is currently in the form of what's called non-concessional lending, loans that are at or above market rates, or that might have punitive terms on repayment default. In the long run, that's not really a transfer of wealth to poor countries, right? It's profiting off them because it's still a loan. So there's interesting campaigning happening around making all of that take the form of grants, yes, which I say in my policies and my other writings, and also hugely scaling it up, yes, which I also talk about. It's not necessarily reparations by the framework of radical scholarship by any stretch, but it's at least beginning to think about addressing inequalities through. Pessimist in me thinks that things will have to get a lot worse before they get better, which is a slightly devastating position to take, and one that I would like to have disproven. Yeah, and that also is not going to happen either. It is going to get a lot worse, but it's not going to get better. As it gets worse, that just provides the ammunition for those in the global north to basically abandon the global south because, oh shit, we gotta hurry and take care of our own people. So fuck you guys. You can die in the heat, right? That's what is going to happen, and that is very much what capitalism is. It's fuck you, I got mine. Global south, after they've looted for hundreds of years, is just gonna be left to die, especially as things get worse. As things get worse, scarcity of resources goes up, and the tribalism will go up, and the deaths in the global south will go up as well. Then eventually, humanity will go extinct. So yeah, this looks like a picture of the cover. I was really struck by some of the statistics you laid out about the sheer scale of industrial farming. I did not know that 60% of animals are livestock. Do you think moving away from meat and toward plant-based diet is necessary on a global scale for climate? So I think a lot of it will be required because like I think it was 60% of the land or like that is actually for grazing animals. Most of that is for cows. Yeah, definitely. We need to get rid of these animals. Well, we don't need to murder the animals, right? We can wild them. But we need to get rid of them as food, raising them as livestock for food, because a lot of the food that we raise goes towards feeding the animals. So yeah, get rid of the animals, shift more to a plant-based diet, which we can do. You can still do small-scale farming, like chickens and cows aren't so bad, especially if you raise them well. Plus, also you've got the artificial meat thing, the stem cell-based meats, which are coming, which is a good thing. Great meat that way. So yeah, just from the sheer point of not wasting our resources, animals, and also not wasting land for food, we definitely need to get away from animals for food. I'm definitely not an agricultural expert, but I use those to highlight how we've shaped the planet in a way. For inhabitants of comparatively wealthy countries, particularly in upper countries, absolutely there needs to be massive change in the way we consume. That includes diet. People get really mad whenever you bring up consumption. I think it's a way to absolve yourself of your role in driving the crisis and penalizes the working class or the global poor for crisis they have had very little in. So I do try to be very careful, but always connecting factors. Less important than the question of meat itself is the way in which we have organized the production. The way methods devised to produce as much as possible and make as much profit as possible. That's what I would focus on rather than. Okay, sure. And the other thing to note here is that the top 10% or something like that pollutes more than the bottom 50. Or something like that, maybe it's the top 1% pollutes more than the bottom 50%. So it's the consumption at the top that really is what really needs to be tackled than those of us at the bottom, right? Toward the end of the book, you write, at best, green capitalist solutions are a deadly distraction from the urgent task of actually slowing, reversing climate crises. At worst, they are actively undermining our ability to do so. The value of a whale makes an incredibly persuasive case that this is true. It's also a depressing case, to be honest, because it feels like we are very far away from a green socialism or green anything else arriving. Statement. Are there any projects to fight climate change worth pursuing within? What? I'll just keep it off for now. Battery's fine. Okay. Right. So there was an article we wrote that we are basically financing our own extinction by subsidies to agriculture and subsidies to fossil fuels. Right. We're financing the doom of humanity, and we're paying for it and all that sort of stuff. That's exactly what's happening. The dire conclusion, I'll let you read it back to me, but the case that I try to make is that there are lots of ways to pursue really good policy within our existing system, policies that might prefigure a much more radical reimagining. And policies talk about all of this. Sort of radical change that we need it's radical. Nowhere near what COP20 is talking about with the fucking anemic 100 billion a year going towards the global south, which no one in the fucking global north is even close to providing. It's horrific. As I say, if what is passed is not trillions of dollars, then you're wasting everyone's time. Human extinction is what they're voting for. These might be reforms that operate within the current system and try to make it slightly better. The ones I find most encouraging are the ones that are linked as much to a much bigger shift in either perspective or the way that we arrange things. So the Inflation Reduction Act is a good example of this. Lots of flaws with the Inflation Reduction Act that we won't unpack here, but the one thing I find really encouraging about this is that for the first time in American climate politics, it represents a shift away from fixation on pricing crisis as the way to resolve the crisis. Entire chapter on that in the book about the need to from the magic of imagined prices, investment-based framework, or a public investment-based. That's a really interesting shift in mindset that speaks to a much bigger project for reimagining how to organize. And shifting to the economies for the common good, as I talk about in my policies, is a kind of a way to do that. It provides an economic incentive for people to actually, for businesses and people to invest in things that are good for humanity and good for the natural world, right? Because if your company it has great minimum wage, great healthcare and education plan, great business partners, and has generative carbon neutral or is providing sustainable energy, they're going to be great investments because they will get significant money back from government, whereas those who are doing fossil fuel, who are polluting and who are using sweatshop labor will have high taxes, if not fees and fines, for the horrors that they're inflicting upon the world. Plus, they also will not have access to state, local, and federal contracts too, so greatly limiting the potential for their income. Another thing, in the UK, the Labour Party announced a plan to build a public option clean energy company to compete with the big fossil fuel generators. Again, it's an encouraging shift. While still operating within capitalism, moves away from a world in which everything has to be justified on the basis of profits. Yep. All the need to shift to publicly owned energy, publicly owned banks, public housing, public food, public, universal basic services is really where we need to be going. And energy is a part of that. Do we have hope that larger scale planned state-led transition is possible? Oh, definitely. And this is the way it needs to be done. It needs to be by the federal government. Like federal government in every single country needs to drop trillions. Looking at the scale and complexity required to coordinate the transition of fossil fuels, it demands the capacity of particularly with the kind of time horizons a decades. Working with the state apparatus and pushing it as far as possibly pushed is a valuable exercise. Turn back to the Inflation Reduction Act, its ability to pass in the form it did, as watered down as it was, which was horrific, the direct result of the much more radical campaign around the Green Deal and much more radical kind of futures. Particularly in the US, there is so much power divested on state and community levels that can be harnessed. The place I'm more skeptical of is how international coordination, UN, FCC, and the COP negotiations are useless. I mean, they're not useless. I don't say they're useless. It's useful to have the conversation, have the light shining, but the agreements, last year was the first time in 26 years that they're holding these that they've been even able to mention fossil fuels, and they only mentioned coal, and that's it. Coal, gas, oil, natural gas. I don't know. It's one of them. They were able to mention one fossil fuel for the first time in 26 years. I don't think I'm alone in taking the position that they're really struggling to be fit for their purposes and to deliver what we need. I'm not sure how to resolve that and what the best alternative is. Yet, have any suggestions for direct action readers can take to help galvanize a larger shift in the change? Mass strikes is pretty much it. Agonistic toward pretty much every member of Congress. That's the only thing. Much like as has been happening in Europe. Do you have any? Having done climate activism for years, it often feels as though going to protest is doing very little. It often feels like in a movement. I do think that having people turn up to protest and having people be part of those movements is incredibly valuable over a long trajectory. Even it might be disheartening. I would encourage everyone to give it a try. So yeah, we read an article where, what is it, 3.5% is required for really 3.5% of the population required for be successful, potentially be successful over 50 time. And that's not, that's a lot of people. Like what, 10% is, so we're talking about 30 million? A lot of people. Is that right? That's 10%. 3 to 30 million people. That's a wide range. If 3 to 30 million people were involved in a large-scale protest I think we could get radical change. Getting those people together is the hard part. Within our having these meetings with some of these RBE, that's one of the things that I often complain about is like got Forward Party, the People's Party, and stuff. We don't need a third party. What we need is an overarching umbrella organization to get all the leftists together and to unify them, get them sharing resources and organizing together instead of competing for resources, competing for votes, and competing for all sorts of things. That is what we need. Umbrella organization to bring everyone together. The other thing would be this. One of the most powerful forces that we're going to need not only drive a transition away from fossil fuels and carbon addiction, but also do in such a way that is just and fair, is to have the trade union movement, or labor as you call it in the US, on our side. And so I think anyone who is a trade union, is in a trade union, or has thought about joining one, should do so and try to bring pressure from the side. So unions can really be vocal on the climate crisis. Yeah, so true. They're often representing the workers that are going to be critical in the future. I think up of the climate movement and labor movement would be incredibly powerful next happening already. Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's, I don't talk about that explicitly in my policies that way, but I do say the default state for pretty much every business should be that, at the very least, that they are unionized. And if we did have much higher levels of union representation throughout, countries, then yeah, the people could voice that sort of a thing and start helping shift businesses ways of doing business and doing their part for climate change. All right, there you go. Sounds like a good book to read. Questions, comments, or suggestions before we move on? Anything? Anybody? Quiet. You guys love me anymore? Okay. I can't hear it, but it's playing, right? Yeah, voice mod. Danger. So now we're getting into some climate change. Nope, not here. All right, so now we're going to get into some climate change stuff, and we've got a video over here that we can watch too, which is pretty interesting. It's a TED Talk. Ooh. Yeah. All right. This is, when is this from? I just saw it. August 11th. So this is from the Revelator, Wild, Incisive, Fearless. I don't think we've read something from this, but here it is. What happens to wildlife swimming in a sea of our drug residue? Wastewater exposes plants and wildlife to hundreds of compounds about the potential side effects and. All right, fish hooked on meth. It's a catchy headline that made rounds a few weeks ago, but it represents a serious problem. Our rivers and streams have become a soup of hundreds of drugs, mostly pharmaceuticals that come from water released from waste facilities. Conventional wastewater treatment can remove some, but not all of the many chemical compounds we excrete from our bodies, or those we improperly dispose of, says Diana Aga, director of the Renew Research Energy, Environment, and Water Institute at the University of. One of the worst offenders, she says, are antidepressants, which are a real downer for wildlife health. Because these chemicals are persistent, they also tend to accumulate in fish. A study she co-authored in 2017 examined fish Niagara River and found the highest bioaccumulation antidepressants occurred in brains, followed by their livers, muscles, Not just fish at risk either. Of course, other species that eat the fish and drink the water, or part of the water, will be. Other aquatic species face the same contaminants, and new research shows it can influence behavior. Spiny cheek crayfish, for example, become bolder after being exposed to fluorescent cytolopram. Bold isn't a great trait for an animal low on the food chain. That wasn't the only side effect. Regulation of pharmaceuticals and aquatic invertebrates pose a range of potential impacts to the vertebrates themselves and their predators, including altered growth, reproduction, and behavior. Researchers, crayfish and other invertebrates play important roles in the ecosystem, so anything affecting them can cascade throughout the habitat. Plants too can take up these chemicals. A study from False Bay in Cape South Africa found the drug diclofenac sea lettuce and edible seaweed. The researchers also found traces of the drug, although in lower quantities, in marine vertebrates, including starfish, mussels. Learning curve. Despite these studies, another 2 decades of research has identified more than pharmaceutical residues in streams. There's still a lot we don't know about how the compounds affect biodiversity. Part of the problem is that many studies have been done in the lab where animals are usually exposed to a single drug. Outside the lab, there are a lot more variables. A lot of these pharmaceuticals may either have synergistic or addictive or maybe synergistic effects when combined, she said. Same thing can happen in humans taking prescribed or over medications. The scope of drugs in the wild becomes a complicated problem. It's very difficult to predict what happens in the wild when they're exposed to hundreds of these pharmaceutical residues at once. Another obstacle. A lot of times people only act when they think something toxic or carcinogenic, she said. That's measured by tracking mortality in tumors. There's less focus on how the compounds affect animal behavior, which is subtle but also. These things that might affect biodiversity in the wild, she says, a population decline because there's less mating, or if they don't recognize predators, they prey. Potential fixes. We might not know all there is to know how drugs in our surface waters affect animals yet, but we know how to tackle the problem. In our study from 2020, we found that advanced treatment systems like ozonation can remove a lot of these pharmaceuticals. Since using ozone to disinfect water can lead to the formation of harmful byproducts, AGA says it's best to use another method, granular activated carbon, or both in combination. Together, they completely remove these granular activated carbon systems for wastewater treatment are like Brita filters commonly used at home. But both technologies, though, will bump up the treatment. Smaller water systems, lack of economies of scale that can cost prohibitive. Now, the next thing would be, what do you do with the activated carbon after it hits chemicals? Right? You need to economy for it. But it might not be long before such treatment systems are the norm anyway. Other emerging contaminants in water, like and polyfluoroalkyl substance PFAS, also pose threats to health and potential wildlife. About these forever chemicals, the regulations used to treat contaminated water. There have been a lot of discussions from the EPA and regulatory that require regulation, which would be a good driving force to update wastewater treatment. Climate change could also help push along better wastewater treatment systems, especially in areas sources, and as the need develops in some places, wastewater irrigation. Yeah, that's going to be a huge issue. All the droughts that are huge issue. Those changes can benefit wildlife by removing more chemical compounds, other contaminants before treated water is discharged back to the environment. While that would be good news, it's already long due. There have been discussions about pharmaceuticals in water for a long time, but response has been slow, says AGA. When I started looking at this a while back, I'd hear people say that pharmaceuticals can't be toxic or that bad because we take them, but we need to broaden our minds. It's not just the people we should be thinking about, we should think about biodiversity. Yeah, and then also, we are eating the fish and we are eating the animals, and we are also getting that in there too, in our bodies as well. All right, next. More great news from climate from Gizmodo from yesterday. Deadliest catch disappears. Alaska's snow crabs have vanished. Now, I could swear it was crabs that were having their shells being disintegrated, dissolving by the, but I can't remember if it was. That might be one of the contributing factors. That following a 90% population reduction in 2 years, the state has canceled snow crab season for the first time. Crabbing in Alaska is a big industry, big enough to inspire television franchises and bring in hundreds of millions of dollars. But it's feared that there will be no king or snow crabs to harvest. Yikes. Crystal Bay's Red King crab fishery will also be closed for the second year in a row. Both decisions follow shellfish surveys that revealed startling population. 2019 and 2021, snow crab numbers in the Bering Sea fell by about 90%. Counts have dropped even further, says the State Department of Fish and Alaska Public. 2021, when they surveyed, we saw the largest decline we've seen in the crab population, which is startling, I think, for everyone west Baltimore. Management of Bering Sea crab must now focus on conservation and rebuilding given the condition of the stock, said the ADF in its announcement. Efforts to advance our science and our crab population are underway. Its crab fishing industry, dramatized in Discovery Channel's Deadliest Catch, is floundering as a result. People are really going to have to make some hard calls here, whether that's selling their vessels or looking for other opportunities in fishing sectors. Fishermen Trout told Alaska Public Media, fishermen are really hurting. So, one of the industries that they can get into is aquaculture or mariculture. They can grow mussels and seaweed and fish in small areas. We've got, I think I talk about that in. I can pull that. And we read an article on this several months ago, talking about that exact thing. Mariculture, yeah, vertical ocean farming. Yeah, so I'll go throw this in here so you take a look at it. This is what they should do. Start moving to this, plus this also cleans the water. Right? So it does carbon sequestration through the mussels and the seaweed, and growing, you can grow crab or fish or something like that in there too. Lots of vertical, it's vertical farming in the ocean is what it is, and it do a lot of great water. That's what they should be instead of crabs. Another fisher, Dean Gribble Sr., told NBC News that the canceled season would be life-changing if not ending for 20. And NOAA valued Alaska's snow crab harvest at more than $101 million. This year it will be. The exact cause of the crab crash is currently unknown, and the state is investigating. Westfall and others think climate change is likely. Bering Sea has endured record-breaking massive waves in years, with a particularly catastrophic one blob occurring between 16. Though the event passed, parts of the Bering Sea spent more than half the time between one under some level of recognized anomalous wave, according to a 2020 report. And even when heat waves weren't occurring, ocean temperatures in the just below wave threshold in significantly average. Snow crabs and other sea life native to the waters around Alaska are adapted to temperatures. When the heat rises, they cope. Biggest issues is deoxygenation. Yep, because as the heat rises, pH also rises, also kills eukaryotes, other chlorophyll-based organisms which process a lot of our carbon dioxide. Warmer water simultaneously holds less oxygen and leads to animals needing more oxygen because of increased metabolic demand. Further, warm water is more buoyant and less prone to mixing, which can lead to stratification of gases in water column, further exacerbating. Climate change is also known to drive marine wildlife disease outbreaks. For instance, the sea star wasting illness that's led climate-specific coast starfish losses warming. Another ADF&G scientist Ben Daly told CBS News that infection or possible culprit behind the recent snow crab disappearance. Alaska is the fastest warming state as polar regions are heating quicker under climate change elsewhere. Yeah, and actually we read another article on that several months ago, right? That people in Alaska are having their houses and they have to compensate for the sinking. That's something they don't really have to deal with, but it's warming up so the permafrost is warming up so quickly that they can't even in a season keep up with it without radical crapload of work of trying to keep their house from sinking. I think there's several places, several communities which are going under. They can't live there anymore. It's a big deal, and when you've got that permafrost melt, all the carbon that is sequestered in there and the methane sequestered in there goes into the atmosphere, and then it increases the number of greenhouse gases, further exacerbate climate change. Okay, next questions, comments, or suggestions before we move on. Look, look, they're imagine that. Lots of doom and gloom. That's what we do here. This is from October 13th. Days ago. Hills. Age of extinction. We are in the Anthropocene. We are in the 6th Great Extinction planet. Animal populations experience average declines of almost 70% since 1970 report. Huge scale of human-driven loss of species demands urgent action, says. Yeah, and basically, if they're not advocating for radical change that I talk about in my policies, then yeah, we're pretty much screwed. Requires trillions and trillions of dollars from the global north to the global south, and as well as being spent in the global north. Energy and to engage in rewilding areas, conservation efforts. Earth's wildlife populations have plunged an average 69% in just under 50 years, according to forests consumed beyond the limits of the planet and pollute on an industrial scale. Open ocean to tropical rainforest, the abundance of birds, amphibians, and reptiles is in free fall, declining on average by more than 2/3 between 1970 and 2018, according to the WWF, World Wrestling Federation, World Wildlife Federation, and Zoological Society of London's Biennial Living Planet report. 2 years ago, the figure stood at 8%. 4 years ago, it was 60%. Many scientists believe we are living through the 6th mass extinction. Yep, the largest loss of life on Earth since the time of the dinosaurs, and that is being driven by humans. Report's 89 authors are urging the ambitious agreement at the COP15 Biodiversity Summit, Canada this December, and to slash carbon emissions to global heating below 1.5 decade. Halt the rampant destruction. Listen, I know people want to believe that, but if the goal is not to be like massively carbon negative, they're voting again for extinction because we are in the end of days, and those feedback loops, the temperature is going like this, right? Going like this up. We need to be carbon negative, start turning that down. Otherwise, you're not going to actually have the temperature go down to one, or keep it to 1.5. Even 1.5 would be devastating globally. Living Planet Index combines global analysis of 32,000 population, 5,230 animal species, measure changes in wildlife across the continents. AXA, producing a graph akin to a stock index of life on Earth. That's interesting. Latin America and the Caribbean region, including Amazon, has seen the steepest population. 94% drop in. Wow. Tanya Steele, chief executive at WWF UK, said this report tells us that the worst declines are in the Latin America, home to the world's largest rainforest, Amazon. Yep, deforestation rates, they are accelerating, stripping this ecosystem not just of trees, but of wildlife that depends on them and act as our greatest allies in the fight against climate. Yeah, and we're to the point now where rainforest is no longer carbon. Okay, so between 1970 and 2018, Latin America and the Caribbean had deepest decline in biodiversity. All right, so here we've got Latin America, Caribbean index value starting at 1, and it went down. Yeah, 0.06. So what? Africa had 66% reduction, Asia Pacific 55%, North 20%, Europe 18%. Yeah, the hotter areas are the ones that are experiencing it. Africa had the second largest rainfall at 66%, followed by Asia and the Pacific with 55%. America was 10%. Europe and Central Asia experienced 18%. While the total loss is akin to the human population of Europe, the Americas, Africa, Oceania, and China appearing according to the. Despite the science, the catastrophic projections, the impassioned speeches and promises, the burning forests, submerged countries, record temperatures, and displaced millions, world leaders continue back and watch our world burn in front of our eyes. Climate and nature crises, their fates intertwined, are not some faraway threat our grandchildren solve with still to be discovered technology. He added, we need our Prime Minister to show the UK is serious about helping people, nature, and the economy to thrive by ensuring every promise our world is kept, falling short, forgotten, or forgiven. Dead. Yeah, the UK and the US need to lead. Like I said, they need to be dropping trillions to the global south, and they need to be dropping trillions for their own economies to shift to sustainable energy, to shift to sustainable farming, that sort of. Because if the United States and Britain lead, since we are the greatest polluters in the world, especially the United States, with the military industrial complex and our terrorist programs globally, then we can actually get a lot of change. Really spearhead that, lead it, and we're doing it than all the other countries. But not gonna happen. Leading nature charities have accused Liz Truss of putting the economy before nature protection, environment, and our rare animal plants could protections when her promise of a bonfire of EU red tape happens this year. The report points out that not all countries have the same starting points with nature decline. That the UK has 50% of its biodiversity richness compared with historical levels according to biodiversity Hackness Index, making one of the most nature depleted countries in the world. Land use change is still the most important driver of biodiversity loss across the planet, according to Mike Barrett, Executive Director of Science and Conservation at WWF. Said at the global level, primarily the declines we are seeing are driven by the loss in habitat, driven by the global agricultural system. habitat, converting it to food. Right, and this is again why I talk about the early article about talking about green capitalism, illusion of green capitalism, that we need to shift our food production to be primarily vertical farming. Then with top of that vertical farm, you can have axis wind turbines, and on top of the vertical axis wind turbines, you can have solar panels, and above that, you could have high altitude wind turbines, or you could have a receiver for a power satellite. So you really need to take significant advantage of what farmland you have, convert it. Like you can take 10% of whatever land you have in the whole country, convert it to primarily vertical farming. Then it uses 10% of the land, 10% of the water. It can be completely, basically organic, and you preserve water. And then the other 90% of that farmland can be used, can be rewilded, plant forests and native plants or whatever, right? And reclaim shitload, reclaim 40% of the land in our country alone by making that. And also we have to get rid of, yes, a lot of the animals for food. And that's, we really need to do that. Like 40% of our farmland, our agricultural land for cows as food. And that's huge. Get rid of cows as food. Way it is. All right. Land use change is still the most important driver of biodiversity loss across the planet, according to the report. Mike Barrett, executive director of said at global level, primary declines we are seeing is driven by loss and fragmentation, habitat-driven agricultural expansion into habitat converting palm oil. You got the rainforest, cattle, right? You got a whole bunch of places where this is going on. Why we need to build up and down vertical farms, especially underground vertical farms, which would be efficient. Read an article on that. Companies is doing just that. All right, the researchers underscore the increased difficulty animals are having moving through terrestrial landscapes as they are blocked by infrastructure and farmland. 30%, 37% rivers longer than 1,000 kilometers, miles remain free-flowing length. Just 10% of the world's protected areas on land. Yeah, so that is something else that we need to do. We need to make sure that throughout each and every country there is basically a well, ideally we live on the outsides and we rewild the interior, but at the very least we should have an entire natural corridor going from one side of the country to the other, so that wildlife has a contiguous space to live in. Some countries are doing that, and that is important. I do that as part of my policy too. Future declines are not inevitable, say the authors who pinpoint the Himalayas, Southeast Asia, Aberdeen Rift, Arc Mountains, Africa, and the Amazon Basin among priority areas. IUCN is also developing a standard to measure the animal known as its green status, which will allow researchers to plot a path to recovery for some extinction on Earth. Pink pigeon, burrowing bettong, and Sumatran rhino were highlighted as species potential. Pink pigeon. Robin Freeman, head of the Indicators and Assessments said it was clear that humanity is eroding the very foundation of life and urgent action needed. In order to see any bending of the curve of biodiversity loss, it's not just about conservation, it's about change. The only way we are going to be able to legislate or call for that is to have these clear measurable targets that ask for recovery of abundance, reduction, extinction risk, and COP. Well, COP isn't binding, so it's not matter, but it's not paper. All right, so there you go. Good news. All life on planet's going extinct. Hallelujah. Oh, you actually can't hear the music. We're gonna play this. Now you can hear the music. Okay, so we're gonna watch this. Drop this in here. This is a pretty interesting TED Talk. I've already watched this. And nope. 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 Get back here. Nope. But I can't do this. All right. Let's get off. Okay, so here, the blind spots of green energy transition. This is it's a good talk. It's not. I don't think it's very positive because that's not what we do here. But let's just make sure you can hear it first. Nope, you can't. That up.
Hi. It's about as intimidating as I thought it would be.
All right, here you go. You guys ready? At some point, this is probably gonna conk out on me again. I don't know why it's starting to do that, but here we go.
Hi. It's about as intimidating as I thought it would be. And yet, you'd think, or I'd think, that I'd be accustomed to more stressful situations. You see, I work in international security and in conflict resolution. And today, I'm here to talk about some of our blind spots related to decarbonization. Now, what does one have to do with the other, you may ask? Good question. We often hear that a climate-safe future is a necessary condition for peace. That's true. We also often hear that renewables could be the energy of peace. Less true. To understand, I need to tell you about the materials that we need in order to decarbonize. They're pretty, and they can be deadly. Looking into their story tells us that confronting conflict and building new forms of international peace are going to be critical foundations to build a climate-safe future. So let me tell you about them, starting with where we stand now. When we talk about a decarbonized future, we generally have in mind the possibility of decoupling economic growth from greenhouse gas emissions. That's what we call green growth. What we tend to think about less often is that to get there, we need to recouple economic growth with intensive mineral extraction. To harness renewables or renewable energy like the sun and the wind, we obviously need to build technologies such as solar panels, windmills, batteries, right? And to build those, we need to mine huge quantities of non-renewable materials such as these. Knowing that it takes mines as big as these to produce that much amount of usable material. Our ticket to green growth, in other words, is digging deep in the environment. Now, we know that mining can have grave impacts for local ecosystems and populations. I've seen it myself, and it really isn't pretty. But what I want to talk about today is about how much and where we're going to have to dig, and what that means for planetary security and for geopolitics. I'll start from there. History tells us that when the dominant source of energy changes, power relations change as well. Countries that can transform energy to their own advantage can gain the upper hand economically and politically, and then can put themselves at the center of the global order. Think of the United Kingdom and coal, for instance, or how oil determined the ascendance of the US to a global superpower. What that tells us is that the access to and processing of energy literally materializes into the ability to shape geopolitical power dynamics. And today, we're facing the challenge of implementing the biggest energy transition in the history of humankind under a ticking climate clock. The race is on for a new generation of power, at the heart of which you have all of the critical materials that we need to decarbonize on the one hand and digitalize on the other. So what's happening with them? On the demand side, we're at the beginning of an exponential demand curve. If you take lithium as a proxy, a key component for battery, global production already increased by just short of 300% between 2010 and 2020. I'm going to pause here for a sec. This is really good news. It means that decarbonization is in motion. The not so good news is that our clean future is going to be more materially intensive than before. If you take a simple measure for it, the International Energy Agency tells us that with the current level of innovation, an electric car requires 6 times more mineral inputs than a conventional car. And this is only the start. The World Bank tells us that with our current, the current projections, global production for minerals such as graphite and cobalt will increase by 500% by 2050, only to meet the demand for clean energy technologies. Now let's look on the supply side. That's where a lot of really interesting things are happening. Who currently exploits and processes minerals, and where deposits to meet future demand are located tell us exactly how the transition is going to change geopolitics. So if you look at a material such as lithium, countries like Chile and Australia tend to dominate extraction, while China dominates processing. For cobalt, the Democratic Republic of Congo dominates extraction, while China dominates processing. For nickel, countries like Indonesia and the Philippines tend to dominate extraction, while China, you guessed it, thank you, dominates processing. And for rare earths, China dominates extraction, while China dominates processing. I've just said China a lot, didn't I? Well, that's because China skillfully leveraged its geo-economic rise to power over the last 2 decades on the back of integrating supply chains for rare earths from extraction to processing to export. We tend to point fingers at China today for not going fast enough on its own domestic energy transition. But the truth is that China understood already long ago that it would play a central role in other countries' transitions. And it is. The European Union, for instance, is 98% dependent on China for rare earths. Needless to say, this puts China in a prime position to redesign the global balance of power. Now, you may argue that this is a good thing, because the global balance of power needs a rehaul anyway. And you know what? I can totally roll with that. But, and this applies to China, the United States, and any other big player, we need to make sure that the redesigning process doesn't compromise on human rights or open societies, and that it doesn't lead to the weaponization of supply chains at a time of international instability, and more importantly, at a time of complete climate breakdown. Unfortunately, we're already seeing signs of this happening. China is currently trying to gain access to more mineral resources through its Belt and Road Initiative. The United States and Europe are both thinking of reshoring critical mining and processing and orienting some of their international partnerships to facilitate access to more mineral resources. Japan is exploring some of its oceanic marine reserves to build strategic reserves. I'm also speaking in the shadow of a war on the European continent. Now, at first sight, Russia's invasion of Ukraine has nothing to do with what I've been talking about. But Ukraine happens to be mineral rich. It also happens to be one of only 2 countries that had struck a partnership with the European Union to diversify and develop supply chains for critical raw materials. That partnership was specifically designed to help the EU decarbonize and, in the process, to better integrate with Ukraine from a political and economic perspective. 8 months after the partnership was struck, the invasion took place. Now, mineral resources may not explain everything about the war, but they certainly can't be ignored in analyzing the events. Because when it comes to the race for critical raw materials, what's actually happening is that we're headed right back into a new scramble for resources, at the heart of which you find all of the big players eyeing countries with vast mineral deposits. And yet it's so obvious. Many of these countries are located, for the most part, in Africa, in Latin America, in Central Asia, and in the Indo-Pacific. Economists will tell you that this is a great thing, because these countries, or at least a lot of them, need economic resources and money to accelerate their development pathway and climate adaptation. But many of these countries also have very real, overlapping risk profiles. The International Institute for Sustainable Development first produced this map back in 2018. Can you see the green dots on the map? They represent all of the different materials that we need in order to decarbonize, their geographic location, and their deposit size. As it so happens, a lot of the deposits are located in countries that rank fairly high on corruption indices. They are represented essentially by the shades of brown and red on the map. And as it so happens, a lot of the materials are also located in countries that are fragile, such as Sri Lanka, or downright conflict affected, like Myanmar and the Central African Republic. That's not all. The Notre Dame Institute tells us with this map, in which you see again some red and orange, that countries that are climate vulnerable are also the ones that are resource endowed. And one final thing. You know those big ecosystems that we need to protect and regenerate in order to stabilize the global climate regime, to reboot the hydrological cycle, and to protect biodiversity? They're also represented in orange and red on this map. Many of these big ecosystems are located in the same fragile countries that I was mentioning before. They also happen to sit on vast mineral deposits. Changing or eliminating these ecosystems through mining, through deforestation, or anything else would undermine planetary security. Not just international security, planetary security. It's essentially like a perfect storm in the making. Corruption, institutional and socioeconomic fragility, climate disruptions, and environmental plunder.
So this is another good reason why we need to get off solar and wind and shift to more baseload power, such as geothermal, tidal, and wave. Because when she's talking about this and the shift to sustainable energy, she's talking about the need for batteries. That's what a lot of that lithium is. All that stuff is needed for batteries. So if we shift away from electric cars and shift to electric mass transportation, and also shifting to non-intermittent or shifting to baseload power, sustainable power, which doesn't require batteries, a lot of this goes away. You don't have to worry about it so much, or we can take it on a much slower pace and deal with it in a way that is much safer and better for the environment. But unless we bypass the green capitalist approach towards destroying humanity, this isn't screwed.
All acting as a backdrop to a competition to gain access to the minerals that we need in order to decarbonize. all of these factors will be magnified if we don't rein in the scramble for resources. All of them will reinforce one another. And I want to make something very clear here. The countries at the heart of the resource scrambling may suffer the most direct consequences in terms of their ability to develop, to adapt to climate change, and to avoid violence. But their fate is not isolated. Their problems are not geographically distant. Our big blind spot here is that we're headed towards a decarbonization trajectory that may end up undermining ecological integrity and heighten the risks of conflict and insecurity, whose consequences would reverberate worldwide. I know that this is not a particularly encouraging picture, and that it comes on top of layers of pictures that are not particularly encouraging. Our modern economies have advanced and grown for 2 centuries through the gigantic blind spot of fossil fuel exploitation and its unintended consequences. The big lesson here is that we can't afford to just shift to a different set of energies, technologies, and materials without paying attention to the unintended consequences. The stakes are too high. They involve our future, that we know, but they also involve our humanity. And they involve our nature, by which I mean the nature that we choose for ourselves. Decarbonization is the way forward. There is not one single doubt allowed about this. But the way forward also demands of us that we start imagining our future beyond decarbonization already. Remember what I said at the beginning? A climate-safe future is a necessary condition for peace. But we won't achieve a climate-safe future without peace. And to build peace, we need to shake things up in international politics and in the way that we do business and economics. So where do we start? I'd like to offer the scaffolding of a plan in 4 different baskets. First, science. Science can tell us exactly where it is safe to mine and where it isn't from an ecological perspective. Where it is not safe to mine, we need to act as though these minerals did not exist and establish protected areas under which no mining licensing can take place. Where mining does take place, we can integrate socioeconomic and ecological regeneration within business models. Second, a global public good regime. If decarbonization is a matter of human survival, then the materials that we need in order to decarbonize should be managed collectively under a global public good regime. The alternative is conflict and planetary breakdown. So while we figure out exactly how to design this regime, the countries at the heart of the scramble for resources should receive adequate support, competent and coherent support to face off the joint challenges of geopolitical competition and climate disruptions on the other hand. In other words, investing into conflict resolution, into the fight against corruption, and into context-specific resilience should be top priorities of our global energy transition. Third, changing the way that we do business and economics. We can't just switch from one energy system to another. I've made that pretty clear, right? What we need instead is to reduce our need for energy and for materials. And that starts with massive public and private investments into circular economic models that favor recyclability and material substitution. Now, here's the thing. We know that this is a necessary step, but not a sufficient one. So what we also need to do is to develop ecological assessments for supply chains that account for greenhouse gas emissions, but also for water, soil, biodiversity, material, and energy footprint all at once. Only on this all-encompassing basis will we understand how supply and distribution chains need to change, and therefore how globalization needs to transform. Fourth, innovation. All of this can only happen if we start shifting our thinking about innovation. Innovation in our times is about bringing back economic footprint within planetary boundaries. Anything else, even the coolest of new products, if it isn't aligned with that goal, it's not innovation, it's business as usual. In our little corner of the world, my team and I at Carnegie Europe have been working really hard to identify what regenerative foreign policy looks like and what it aims for. There are two things that we know by now. One is obvious. We need to tackle fundamental issues around economic redistribution on a global scale. The other thing is that we need a geopolitical de-escalation around decarbonization and regeneration. We've translated that into a concept we've called ecological diplomacy. And we're pushing really hard for the European Union to adopt this framework within their foreign policy. Because if there is one thing that we've understood, is that ecological integrity is the foundation for all types of security, which makes it the one common denominator that we can work on rebuilding collectively. And we can manage. Truly, I believe that we can. As long as we shed light on our transition blind spots and take them as our guiding companions to identify what truly systemic, truly peaceful, and truly safe solution pathways look like for the age of climate-disrupted futures. Thank you so much.
All right. There you go. I hope that you found that interesting and she does a lot of great things that I think are very good. I need to really dig into this, especially steps. Those last four steps that she talks about in but a big part of that is that those rare earth minerals are in places which are in danger first hurt by climate change. I need to get away from sustainable energy like fossil solar and wind, which require batteries. Drive for batteries, which is really has us need this high level of sustainable energy, high levels of rare earth minerals, and also shifting away from cars, electric cars, and mass transportation. So those two things, shifting mass transportation and shifting to baseload sustainable energy like geothermal and tidal wave and altitude and wind turbines and that sort of thing, that's what we need to do to help facilitate this sort of a thing. That's where we need our countries need to be throwing trillions and trillions of dollars into, as well as rewilding areas, biodiversity protection, conservation. Okay, all right. Any questions, comments, or suggestions on the ecological thing? I got some more great, high quality, uplifting capitalist stuff to go over next. Anybody? This was shared in one of the RBE. How poverty, not pain, is driving Canadians with disabilities to consider medically assisted death. It was last week. I saw this before. I didn't cover it. Didn't get to it, but covered that. So this is one of the. This is something that is very, very capitalist, right? Driving people to kill themselves, especially people with disabilities, because it's so much more difficult to exploit them for fun and corporate profit. So ignoring them to the point where that they want to kill themselves because they can't live a equitable life as someone who doesn't have a disability. There isn't too much more capitalist than that. Poverty, not pain, is driving some disabled Canadians toward medically assisted death. Yeah, so poverty, again, poverty. There's money to be made in their place. Poverty is a policy choice. Poverty does not have to. As policies, universal health care, universal education, universal housing, right? Universal electricity, transportation. The universal basic services model would cover most of the problems that struggling abilities are often ignored by society. ableist. All right, here we go. Hello, you've reached the Provincial Health Services Authority telephone line for medical assistance in dying. So it's good that they have this service. It's in my policies that the that medical assistance side should be, it's a human right. But the fact that people are being treated because of poverty, because inflicted upon them by capitalism, that's not a good thing. That's a really bad thing. It's really a massive indictment of the horrors of what capitalism is doing. And even as we talk about, when people talk about that, Canada is in much better shape than we are, in the United States, and they've got the assisted suicide thing going on, and it's going to be quite the problem there. And this is the sort of thing that they would say that, hey, under communism or socialism, this is what you would have. People would be so poor that they want to kill themselves. Well, guess what? This is happening under capitalism. Now, what do you got to say? This is the automated recording Joni Cowie got when she called the government to see if she would be eligible for medical assistance in dying, commonly known. Unmistakable message from the government if you want to end your life. We'll help you. You've got the number. Call the number on the government website. They will provide doctors that will sign off. President Ontario. They can have me dead in 90 days. That's what I was told. Howie certainly meets the medical criteria. I have severe asthma, and that's COPD is in Guillain-Barré syndrome as well as cancer, and I also recently fractured my back. She's tired a lot. Enacted in 2016, Canada's first made legislation required that death be reasonably foreseeable. However, based on subsequent legal challenges, the legislation was ruled unconstitutional and the rules were changed. Starting last year, anyone who has a serious illness, disease, or disability that is irreversible with enduring and tolerable suffering. Okay, yep. But critics say that the government's quick expansion of MAID and insistence that it's the compassionate thing to do misses an important factor. Massive numbers of how we are trapped in an excruciating cycle of poverty. Right, that's exactly the issue. They had their poverty, had the social support that they needed to live. This would be less of an issue with the indictment of horrors of capitalism, even in the first world. I get angry at people say you need to budget better because I just want to say to them to go to hell. She said, yeah, I mean, a budget won't get you out of poverty necessarily because you don't have enough money to budget. It's easy to make more money if you have money, but if you don't have it, and you basically can't work, and maybe because you're disabled and you have fixed income, therapy isn't going to fix poverty. Budget isn't going to fix poverty, especially disabled. It's not the way it fucking works. Howie developed epilepsy when she was 6 years old, but still managed to pursue education and work full time. I have my criminology degree, I also have a couple of college degrees. Oh, and I taught at a local college here. But as her disabilities and pain piled up over the years, her employment options narrowed. So that is also a common experience. According to Statistics Canada, only 31% of people who are severely disabled are employed. Yep. Today, Cowie is unable to work and has no family support. She lives with her daughter, a university student also disabled. Together, they must find a way to scrape by on $1,200 from Ontario's Disability Support Program and a few hundred more for her daughter. It isn't nearly enough, and going without is especially hard during Thanksgiving as Canadians sit down to enjoy a holiday. Right, so, I mean, they're pretty much in a similar situation as we are in the United States, that they are fixed income is poverty wages. They're impoverished while living on government support, and that is devastating. It's that the biopsychosocial harms of poverty can help compound the effects of the disability that they already have. Poverty pays dividends, and this is definitely one of those cases where that is the case. All I want is a butterball turkey, make my own butterball turkey that I used to make, and I can't do that anymore, Howie told Global News. We have about $59 left to buy groceries in a month because our home, we have to have housing insurance. Rent, hydro is high, gas is high, she says. We put it in together and pay the bills and hope we can make it every month. Dr. Nahid Dosani says that kind of poverty and stress is making people sicker and driving a lot of Canadians with disabilities to consider ending their lives. Yeah, that's exactly right. And this is the biopsychosocial toll of poverty is devastating. I mean, I facilitated a talk in 2018, a conversation in 2018 about poverty, and did a bunch of research on that. And it is devastating, especially with children. Children get brain damage from poverty, and I mean literally, poverty gives children brain damage, and it makes them more likely to be susceptible to anxiety, stress, and other things of that nature. Dr. Dosani is a palliative care physician and assistant professor in Department of Family and Community Medicine at the University of Toronto. People are living in abject poverty when they're on social assistance in almost every province and territory across Canada. Right, and it's going to be very similar here in the United States. And the issue that we should really take from this is that people living on fixed incomes from the government are living in poverty because the government chose to impoverish them. There is zero reason for any of these people to live in poverty, because when Congress passes a bill, tax money doesn't fund it. Pass a bill, money is added to the appropriate congressional spending account, and then the shit gets paid. There's no reason for anyone that is getting paid by the government to be living with poverty wages, with poverty income. It's horrific. It is a choice that politicians make to impoverish these people. It's an indictment as much of capitalism as it is of the government itself, allowing this to happen. It's horrific. The numbers are grim. Looking across the country, provincial disability support rates vary from as low as $700 a month in New Brunswick to a high of $1,685 in Alberta. Try getting by on $1,200 a month in Toronto, or $1,300 in Vancouver, where the average rent on a one-bedroom apartment is about $2,500. The result is that, according to a 2017 report from Statistics Canada, nearly a quarter of disabled people are living in poverty. That's roughly 1.5 million people, or a city about the population of Montreal. When people are living in such a situation, when they're structurally placed in poverty, is medical assistance in dying really a choice, or is it coercion? That's the question we need to ask ourselves, Dr. Dosani says. That's exactly right. Defenders of Canada's assisted dying regime insist there are robust safeguards. Applications have to be approved by 2 doctors. The process takes at least 90 days, and those who cite inadequate financial and social supports are not supposed to be approved. But there are at least a few cases that show those guidelines may not always be followed. Yeah, I mean, how is their condition ever going to improve when poverty will make it worse automatically? They have no hope for getting better while impoverished. In February, a 51-year-old Ontario woman who called herself Sophia chose to die, reportedly because she suffered severe chemical sensitivities and wasn't able to find affordable housing that didn't worsen her condition. Housing is a human right. Trudeau Lemons, a professor of health law and policy at the University of Toronto, says that whatever the intent behind Canada's laws, the government has ignored the experiences of other countries and created a system rife with problems. Of course, as long as money is a part of it, that is always going to be the issue. Because there's no profit in making the world a better place. In my view, we're actually failing to implement even some of the most basic safeguards that actually exist in those countries. Lemons cites the Netherlands and Belgium, the first countries in the world to legalize doctor-assisted death. It became legal in those countries in 2002, but he says there are important differences between their systems and Canada. Of course, the Netherlands has one of the highest levels of equity in the world, into some of those Nordic states there. You combine how in Belgium and in Netherlands, people don't put medical assistance in dying on the table. All doctors have to basically explore with the patient other options. He says those missing safeguards and no review system for difficult cases make Canada's laws the most permissive in the world. In the context of medical assistance in dying, we're getting rid of this idea that we will first try the least interventionist measures. There is no jurisdiction in the world other than Canada that frames this as just a medical intervention. It means that a life-ending action. Ironically, what started as a compassionate argument to allow chronically ill and disabled people the right to control their own bodies has turned into accusations of discrimination. We're basically sending the message that persons with disability, who are not dying, have an understandable reason to end their life. And this is discriminatory, Lemon says. It's classist, most likely racist, and it's ableist. Persons with disability and many disability advocates will say, well, don't give us that compassion, give us simply the support to live. Exactly. Allow us or help us to promote our inclusion in society in a way that we feel valued. 100%. Universal basic services is the way to approach that. The world has noticed. In August, the Associated Press extensively chronicled the case of Alan Nichols, a BC man, British Columbia, who was admitted to hospital as a result of a mental health check and was granted doctor-assisted death in hospital only weeks later over the objections of his family. Brother Gary insists Alan didn't meet the medical criteria for MAID. Alan's family members have been unable to get an explanation that satisfied them and maintain Nichols should still be alive. Also, one moment. The child is some bizarre reason texting me, calling me, even though I am. Second. These cases follow multiple concerns raised by the UN Special Rapporteur on the rights of persons with disabilities. In 2019, she reported that during a visit to Canada, seniors told her they were offered a choice between a nursing home and medical assistance in dying. Good stuff. Look at that. And in 2021, in a letter to the federal government, the Special Rapporteur expressed grave concerns that Canada's expanded eligibility criteria would violate Canada's international obligations to respect, protect, and fulfill the core rights of equality and non-discrimination of persons with disabilities. Okay. Yep, that is a thing. Yeah, that is a big problem. Lemon says he's been warning the Canadian government for years it needed to slow down. An annual report on MAID released in July showed that 10,064 Canadians opted for an assisted death in 2021, a 32% increase over 2020. Wow. I am certainly concerned that Canada has, in a very short period of time, bypassed the numbers in jurisdictions like Belgium and Netherlands. In should be lowercase. This is not good. Numbers don't show how many people who opted for medically assisted death were living in poverty, but Dasani says it's not acceptable for anyone to choose to die for lack of financial and social support. I hear arguments, well, this is not impacting that many people, but you know what? If it affects one person, that's way too many people. Yep, we need to do something about that. Lemon says the rapid expansion of eligibility criteria for MAID, particularly during the pandemic, sent the wrong message to the disabled community. Yep. To say that we, the persons with disability, urgently need life-ending procedure in that kind of a period, I think was disturbing, was really insensitive and reckless. For Luca Lazy Legs Patuli, the treatment of people with disabilities during the pandemic when compared to the able-bodied was a wake-up call, especially when CERB checks were being issued en masse. If the standard of living is $2,000 a month, according to the Prime Minister, then why are people with disabilities collecting checks for thousands of dollars for $1,000 a month. Exactly right. Exactly right. Patuli serves as a national co-chair for the advocacy group Disability Without Poverty. The plight of disabled Canadians, particularly during the pandemic, encouraged him to raise his voice. Reality is that it was a big slap in the face for the disabled community when many disabled Canadians were not eligible for the CERB. Oh, that's interesting. Patuli is best known as headlining dancer at the 2010 Paralympic opening ceremonies in Vancouver. Despite a neuromuscular condition that affects his legs, he has found success as a choreographer, hip-hop dancer, and motivational speaker. I think that as a society, we should encourage individuals of all abilities of the possibility to discover their true potential. And the biggest thing that we can do is lift people up, right? And people can't even begin to work towards finding, what their potential is if they're living in poverty. It's never going to happen. Patuli credits much of his success to the financial and moral support of a close family. He knows many Canadians with disabilities don't have that. He also knows what could be taken away. The reality is that at any point in anyone's life, something can happen where disability becomes a part of your life. That's exactly what happened to Les Landry. Yeah, and the older you become, the more likely that you are going to be disabled at any given time. So, I mean, even if you're not disabled now, there's a high likelihood that you'll become disabled later on. Fully, 20% of the population at any given time is disabled, majority of which are elderly. We all, assuming we don't die early, we're going to become elderly, we're going to be in this disabled section, disabled demographic, but also if you're disabled, you're most likely going to be impoverished as well. So, it's kind of this chain of effect of growing old, becoming impoverished, and then killing yourself because you're impoverished. It's not good. Not good at all. Les Landry. I was doing good, making good money, $85,000 a year, just over a decade ago. Landry was working as a truck driver, then disaster truck. I developed a hernia, and that's when the surgery happened. That's when the blood pressure went out of control. That's when I developed epilepsy and 3 mini strokes, and things just fell apart. Today the Medicine Hat Atlanta man is in a wheelchair and has severe chronic pain, but that's not why he's planning to apply for MAID. The numbers I crunch, I will not make it. Like in my case, the problem is not really the disability, it's the poverty. It's the quality of life, he says. Andrew got by for years just barely on disability payments of $1,685 and timely donations solicited on Twitter. He also received a few benefits available under Alberta's disability program, only a few $100 extra, but it allowed him to budget and get ahead on his bills. Then he turned 65 and through a bureaucratic loophole actually lost benefits. What I lost is the disability benefits. Service dog allowance, special diet allowance, transportation allowance. He said, I'm no longer a person with disability. I'm a senior citizen in poverty. He worries that with the loss of income and rising prices, he may soon be homeless. He's making plans to end his life before that happens. Jesus Christ. I'm not against MAID. What I'm against is the expansion of MAID without the improvement of benefits or quality of life. I mean, it's lopsided, he said. Yep. How do you target a segment of society with basically death as their only option to get out of their situation? And you don't do anything by helping them out of that situation. I mean, how do you explain that? Profit, bitch. That's how. Profit. You can't be exploited for fun and corporate profit, so what's the point? There may be hope on the horizon for some. The federal government has tabled Bill C-22 for the second time. The legislation calls for the creation of a federal disability benefit. It expired the first time last year when the federal election was called, but we already know it won't cover seniors like Landry. That excludes me and anybody in my situation. There's going to be a lot of people that are not going to be qualified for this Canadian disability benefit. Myself and anybody like me that's over 65. 20% of Canadian workers set to retire in the next decade. That could be a major problem. We are seeing a weakening social safety net for people who are aging in this country, and particularly for people with disabilities, and that really worries me, Dr. Dasani says. I suspect we're going to continue to see many more aging Canadians, particularly with disabilities, falling through these cracks. Joni Cowie has heard the promise of more help before. People with disabilities have been put on the back burner. Nobody gives a damn about them, she says. It's eugenistic policies, right? I've cried a lot at night. I usually stay up a lot of the night. I pray a lot. She talks to a lot of people in the same position on social media. She says they're just trying to hold on, but running out of hope. Almost everyone is like, yeah, it's kind of waiting to see. We like to make it to a year, but I don't think we're going to make it to a year. Les Landry says if something doesn't change, he sees no way out. I don't want to die. I don't want to die. I just can't see me living like this for the rest of my life. Poverty is devastating. That's what capitalism is. That is what capitalism is. Eugenics. It's classist, ableist, colonialist, misogynist, all the goodists. Okay. Any questions, comments, or suggestions at this point? That's all the posts I had planned at this point. Now we're looking at some posts that I had from last month that hadn't gone over yet. So we'll kind of go into that next. Anything? Anybody? So quiet. I'm gonna go see if I'm even streaming. It says I am. Twitch. Can you hear me? Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Can you hear me? Yeah, you can hear me now. All right, good. Making sure. Sounds okay. All right. So the next post, it's less, it's not really lift me up, but it's not, that doomer here. This is from last month, about the same time. 2 months ago. 2 months ago. August 19th. A national infrastructure bank could be the answer to both inflation and recession. So, I have not read this. I'm not sure what this is going to talk about, but ultimately, the federal government engaging in basically a Green New Deal is what could be done, especially if we engage in nationalizing or at least municipalizing the banks. That is what could very strongly power all of this, especially backed by the federal government. All right, let's see what they have to say. So here we've got Jesse Johns of Des Moines left, works with the crew on the new Morningstar Bridge crossing I-35 and I-80, July 28th, 2017 in Iowa. Combination of inflation, looming recession, and crumbling U.S. infrastructure make a convincing case for a new Bank of the United States. Okay. With the economy in recession and inflation soaring, it's becoming more likely that the country is going to experience a very long and agonizing period of stagnation and inflation. With prices continuing to go up while unemployment increases as well, putting millions out of work with no means of support to pay for very basic essential goods and services. The supply of goods and services available to consumers is going down while the demand for such goods is going up. The traditional treatment for this economic condition is for the Federal Reserve Bank to raise interest rates so high that consumers will no longer have the means to pay for credit for even the most basic necessities. The theory, based on historical practice, is that by downsizing the economy into recession, inflation would be reduced, even if it comes at the cost of millions of jobs, home foreclosures, high unemployment, and increased poverty. Yeah, that's fucking stupid. That's austerity. Austerity is never the answer. There are viable alternatives to the traditional prescription of root canal economics to resolve the inflationary dilemma. Some leading experts have been advocating a tried and true method of stimulating the economy while reducing inflation at the same time. If you want to deal with inflation, you tax the shit out of the rich. That's what you do. There you go. Next. The model they used to accomplish this goal goes back more than 200 years to the early days of the Republic when Alexander Hamilton was Secretary of the Treasury in the administration of George Washington. At that time, a national bank was established by Congress to provide a safe depository for federal financial accounts, as well as to facilitate commerce and infrastructure improvements by leveraging federal assets to make loans for important projects that would benefit the nation's economy. Now, this was under a specie-backed currency, too, backed by gold and silver and that sort of. A little bit different than would be implemented today, but not too much. Bank of the United States, with its headquarters in Philadelphia, was hugely successful for a few decades in its mission to provide financing for internal improvements, especially in territories that were largely undeveloped. However, in its later years, there were allegations of mismanagement and corruption. Banks that were established in individual states were also jealous of the growing power. And my earphones died again. I don't know why. Battery is fine. All right, well, don't need to hear. In the 1830s, during the administration of President Andrew Jackson, the federal deposits were withdrawn, and eventually the bank and its assets were sold to a group of private investors. That was stupid. In 1932, during the Great Depression, a new bank for infrastructure, similar in some aspects to the Bank of the United States, was established by the administration of the President Herbert Hoover. It became known as the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, and similar to its 19th century predecessor, was set up to provide much needed funding for public works and other improvements to the nation's infrastructure. The RFC, an independent government agency 100% owned by the federal government, was capitalized by issuing bonds which were subsequently purchased by the Treasury Department and later sold to the public. What? So the agency issued bonds purchased by the Treasury Department. That's just ridiculous. That's just ridiculous. Okay, so all they need to do is just increase taxes on the rich and things of that nature, and that'll help solve the inflation issue. Okay, when Franklin Roosevelt became president, he greatly expanded the RFC and its purpose to provide financial relief in the form of loans to states and local governments so that they might increase their own spending for public works and internal improvements. The sale of treasury bonds to enable more capitalization of the RFC was also increased. Thanks to the RFC program, during the 1930s, there was huge activity for improvements to the nation's infrastructure, as well as funding through state, local agencies, and community banks to stimulate the economy in regions that were suffering the most. Okay, so yeah, bonds could be used as an inflationary guard. Definitely, they can be. They definitely can be. But because rich people and other investments will buy bonds, long-term bonds. So sure, yes, they can be a way of hedging against them. That's fine, but it's not required. It's not required to fund federal spending by issuing bonds. That's all I really need to say. Thanks to the RFC program during the 1930s, there was huge activity for improvements to the nation's infrastructure, as well as funding through state, local agencies, and community banks to stimulate the economy in the regions that were suffering the most. Another example of RFC initiatives was funding for the creation of the Federal National Mortgage Association, which assisted banks and independent mortgage brokers to assist homebuyers with financing that they would otherwise not be able to obtain. The emphasis on public improvements and infrastructure were guided by economic benefits for the entire country, not corporate profits divided between shareholders and investors. Despite its enormous achievements, the RFC was discontinued in the 1950s. Since that time, there have been various federal programs to allocate direct funding for shovel-ready public works and improvements to infrastructure. This occurred notably in the first years of the Clinton administration, as well as the Obama administration. More recently, Congress passed a $1 trillion bill to pay for infrastructure and other improvements, which would benefit the national economy. However, those are not lasting solutions for maintaining an effective infrastructure to support the national economy. In response to extreme demands on the nation's infrastructure from the pandemic, wars, climate issues, and various other crises, including interruptions affecting the domestic supply chain, as well as inflationary pressures on consumers and producers. Several groups have called on Congress to come up with a permanent solution to the demands on infrastructure and other supply chain issues. Last year, the National Infrastructure Bank Act was introduced in the House of Representatives to provide a permanent solution to inflation and related supply side issues, as well as improving and maintaining the national. Okay, all right. National Infrastructure Bank, as proposed to Congress, would be an independent agency like the U.S. Postal Service, operating entirely by the authority of Congress under the supervision and control of the federal government. Okay, the bank obtained its funding from the sale of preferred shares in exchange for U.S. Treasury bonds. Okay, so that is the problem right there. If it's completely controlled by the federal government, it doesn't need bonds. You don't need anything to fund it. The government, all you do is part of the bill is say it's completely funded by the federal government. You're done. You're done. Now, they can still work on issuing treasury bonds just as an inflationary hedge. That is fine. But saying completely that its spending will be funded by treasury bonds is counterproductive in the long run, and pretty much ensures it will die at some point. The preferred shares have a set return with no voting or control over the bank. The treasury bonds will serve as collateral for loans to state and local governments to pay for improvements to existing infrastructure and create new infrastructure, expand public works, and provide for other internal improvements that will create millions of jobs, increase the supply of goods and services, and reduce inflation while stimulating economic growth. Like the Postal Service, the bank would be managed by a board of directors who would be responsible to Congress and the executive branch. They would not be accountable to shareholders and investors. The bank would have a direct mission to providing funding to states and local governments. And Alex, man, how you doing? Happy Saturday. I'm reading an article here on potentially creating a bank to fund infrastructure improvements in the United States. Good, good. My headphones aren't working for some reasons. They just started turning off, so I can't hear anything. Not that I need to hear anything now because, there's no sound. Nothing to listen to, but yeah. Doing good. Doing a lot of writing. I'm reading a Dan Brown book called Origins. I think it's about artificial intelligence. So that's good. How is the Netherlands? How's Netherlands treating you? We're doing okay. I got out a huge website, an intranet website for accessibility at work. That was last Monday, I think. Last Monday, so that was really cool. We're of course in a sort of a problem. What sort of problem? Ukraine problem? Is that what you're referring to? War, yeah. Yep, that is a problem. Ukraine. War there is a big, big problem. Big problem for everyone. It shouldn't be a thing, unfortunately. What's specifically happening with you guys in Netherlands? Well, stayed up a little bit too late reading my book. I'm reading it on my phone. Oh yeah, gas and electricity. Yeah. Yeah, ours. I don't know how high ours are. I don't really do any driving. The wife does, but I had to. I mean, it was almost at least doubled over here at least one point, but it has been going down. I don't know what it is now. How high? How much has it increased for you guys? Too much that other people can't pay their bills. Yeah. We had that problem too a little while ago. I mean, it was ridiculous. Some people, were had to quit their jobs because it was too fucking expensive to even drive to work. I mean, it's just ludicrous. Ludicrous. We need to shift to sustainable energy. Got 300 euro to 900 euro per month. Okay, well that's all right. Go from 300 to 900. Oh, you tripled in price. Yeah, that's ridiculous. Ours at least doubled at its height, at least from what little driving I've done, but triple would be ridiculous. Jesus Christ. Yeah, sorry to hear that, guy. Not good. We read a few articles talking about sustainable energy and stuff like that, and yeah, and you guys already have mass transportation, but heating is probably the big issue where a lot of people are getting hit. But shifting to, yeah, sustainable energy for all that stuff is very much something that we need to do. Geothermal, tidal, wave, altitude wind turbines, power satellites. If you're on welfare, then you get about 900. Wow. Crazy. That's crazy. I'm glad I'm working at home. I'm glad I don't have to worry about it. You know, my wife and I are in a position of privilege here that our work is, well, I work at home, so I don't ever have to leave, and then my wife she works a block away in our yoga studio. We own a yoga studio. That's what she does. He put a cap on it from 2023. Oh, okay. Well, that's, wow. Crazy. And my wife does most of the driving, so she has to deal with the gas. So our gas bills aren't too bad, but I don't think our yeah, that is huge. It is really big. I'm not sure what our bills are. I don't think our gas price are, because our house is heated through natural gas, but well, we just started turning it on, so I'm not sure. Not sure how it's going to affect us. We'll see. 17.1% inflation. Jesus, it's insane. Governments need to start putting in laws for price fixing, price regulation, because when companies are getting record profits, that's not really inflation, it's price gouging. It's crisis profiteering. Normally it's stable between 1% and 2%. Wow. That's really good. 17. Jesus. Yeah, and this is just, there's no reason for it. I mean, it's just companies thinking they can get away with it. War starts, and then all of a sudden, woohoo, we're making lots of money. I think here they talk about 3 to 5% would be normal inflation here, I guess, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure what it is here, but prices have gotten a lot bigger. Well, that's good, but that extra profit being taxed doesn't help the people at the pump, at the stores. Price fixing should come first, and then taxing the extra profits should come later. There needs to be a lot more of that. Specifically, like they could do that with the fossil fuels. Well, they pay the price fixing from the extra taxes. Well, right, but that doesn't help the people when they're paying for it, right? People are paying triple prices for stuff, and then the companies are paying more in taxes. That doesn't help the people. Right, so the government fixing the price, make sure that people don't pay more for it. That's where the real help is. That prevents everything. They will pay maximum? Okay. That's a start. That is a start. Yeah, if I were in charge, things would be very, very aggressive on that sort of thing. I'd be, especially no longer 900 euro. Lots of price regulation and lots of increased taxes on fossil fuel industry. Ooh. Mm-hmm. Yep, there's lots of issues in this day. Capitalism is all of it. Fixing capitalism is a difficult thing. I've been working on a most profit made now by clean energy. Well, that's good. That's good to hear. And Netherlands, Finland, Germany, a lot of the countries in Europe are doing very well at hitting sustainable energy goals. And that's a great thing. That is a great thing. I'm really jealous. I wish our country wasn't so ass backward that we were doing similar, but nope, not gonna happen. And of course, one of the issues is a lot of the sustainable energy that's being put out there is from solar and wind, which requires batteries because of intermittency, and that has a huge problem for they don't have to pay for buying gas, but they can sell their energy for profit. Okay, well that's good. So that's a good thing. That's a good thing. We need more electricity out there based off sustainable energy. That is very, very good. Yeah, so yeah, we need to concentrate on baseload sustainable energy like geothermal and ocean, tidal, wave, high altitude wind turbines, power satellites, things of that nature, instead of solar and wind, because that creates extra environmental problems by requiring more tearing up the environment to dig for the rare earth minerals to support the batteries. Bottleneck is the amount of people capable of installing solar panels, windmills. Well, that's definitely part of it. And you guys have a lot of windmills going on there, which is cool, but baseload power, you'll need a lot less of that, solar panels and windmills, if you had baseload power, sustainable baseload power, geothermal and tidal and that sort of a thing. And less batteries, if you had more baseload power, sustainable baseload power sources. You guys already have the mass transportation going on, which is awesome. And I think your guys' mass transportation is, your trains are pretty much powered by wind power, right? Like 100%, if not more. It has been for quite a while. Just from something I've seen. It's awesome. I would kill for that. It's overloaded with it, not too much electricity or not enough. Or not enough electricity. Overloaded which way? Too much demand or too much supply? Oh, okay. So yeah, be too much demand. It's just your electric grid isn't able to handle either. Well, I suppose that not having a grid that can handle it is highly problematic too. Even if you had all the solar panels and windmills installed, if the grid can't handle it, that's when the sun is shining and the wind is blowing. Oh, right. Yeah, that's always going to be an issue when it comes to sustainable energy. To wind and sun and stuff like that, because it's intermittent. That's why, again, concentrating on baseload power, sustainable energy will be easier. Then you'll have less of that. Right? But if at night electric cars are loading them, then that is the way around. Right. And that's kind of what Tesla was trying to do, or is trying to do currently. We read an article on this months ago, that with Teslas, people in certain areas can volunteer to have their Tesla power, their battery and their power walls also be a part of a large electric company to provide electricity to people in those areas. Yeah, there are ways of dealing with it, but intermittent power and having batteries is a part of the problem. We would still need batteries to store energy just in case, right? But it wouldn't be quite as required as it is now during the transition if we had sustainable baseload power and more mass transportation. At least here in the United States, you guys have mass transportation and bikes and stuff like that, but here we don't. Most people are at daytime at work and during the night they're at home. Yep. True statement. Yeah, electric cars charging at night, yeah. And that's something, if you had smart metering, you could deal with. Like, if you know when they get up and when, when charging is better, they can charge, different times of the night. Reduce that. But yeah, if everyone has their cars at home and everyone is charging, that is a problem. Can't really use that extra power from the sun and the wind at night if it's being produced in the day. Unless they were plugged in during the day, then they could charge during the day, taking that extra power. Do it that way. That would probably be a good way to do it. Yep, if only we had that problem here in the United States. I'm jealous. Wish I could be in the Netherlands. We are starting to build massive terminals for hydrogen. Oh, okay. I don't know what to think about hydrogen yet. I know Japan is really trying to hit that hard. I don't know. I don't know enough yet to have an opinion on hydrogen. I've heard it's not a good way to go, but I've also heard it's a good way to go depending on, technologies. There's also solar to hydrogen. We covered that. There's actually a house in Wisconsin that is solar to hydrogen. They do that, and it works really well. So I don't know. I don't know what to think about hydrogen, but that's cool. You guys are getting options for different types of sustainable energy. That's good. Flexibility is good. And hydrogen can use existing infrastructure too, as well, for like natural gas and stuff like that, if I remember correctly. It's the easiest way to put electric energy into chemicals. Okay. Okay, cool. All right, man. I got to get going. It's 5 o'clock. Well, almost 5 o'clock. Do you have any last minute questions, comments, or suggestions before we call this a day? It's good to see you. Glad you're doing okay. That things over there are doing better than they are here. They're also pretty far into building hydrogen jets. Oh, really? Oh, that's cool. Do you have a link on that? I would love to read about that. I know we have some advancements in electric planes. Why? Keep doing that. Yeah, it helped my daughter get her Roblox account. I think in about a few years, most planes fly on hydrogen. Ooh, I don't know about that. I don't know. That would be good. I mean, sustainable energy would be good because we have plenty of hydrogen, but I don't know if hydrogen is going to be the answer. I've read some stuff that, it has issues, but maybe there's going to be some advancements that will solve those, which would be, it'd be nice to be able to switch to that. I hope so. We need something. Definitely need something. All right, man. Thank you so much for stopping by, man. I appreciate it. You're the only person. It's been a quiet few weeks. Girly Bear stopped by last week, and that was pretty much it. You're stopping by this week. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. I'm gonna have to go for today. Have a great weekend. Stay COVID free. And we'll see you hopefully next week on Saturday, 2 to 5 U.S. Central. All right, man. Have a great weekend. Keep forgetting you're online. Yeah, I know. I appreciate it though when you do show up. It's great. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you later, man. Bye. Let's see if my thing works this time.